that point? Is the state wanting to use then a paper transcript that has been prepared and already disclosed, or are you wanting to roll the words under the video itself?
The latter, Your Honor, but it's the same transcript that's been applied to the video for demonstrative purposes.
Right, I believe Ms. Myers has already indicated it's not in fact the same because the portions that would otherwise refer to being inaudible in the transcript do not appear the same in the video.
Okay, so we want in the video the word inaudible to appear instead of.
I believe that's what they're suggesting as a part of, or at least part of their objection, because it is not exactly the transcript itself.
Well,
To clarify, Your Honor, I'm not suggesting that. I'm simply using that as a justification for why this shouldn't come in. The transcripts are clear. There's so many portions that are inaudible that the transcripts just shouldn't be used. I don't think under Martinez they're appropriate.
Well, Ms. Myers, this was why during the evidentiary hearing, I specifically asked the question, if Ms. Magbanawad testifies at that point, there is someone who is a direct participant in this conversation who can verify the authenticity of either the recording or any transcript that has been prepared. I'm not sure whether or not you all were expecting her to testify or not. She has testified that it's authentic.
Well, I think given her previous testimony in the last trial, Your Honor, where she said she couldn't hear, these very same statements that were presented to the jury in that case on clips, I think we have a credibility issue at a minimum. I don't know why she suddenly determined that she can hear everything that's being said when she couldn't at her trial in 2022.
Am I to determine her past testimony as far as ruling on this specific point?
No, Your Honor, but at a minimum, I think we ought to be entitled to do a voir dire of her to determine what she can hear and what she can't, and why she suddenly changed.
Well, Ms. Kappelman, any additional argument?
no, sir. I think her prior statements regarding. No, but I'm going to. Yes. I think her prior statements are not in evidence. I don't recall her being impeached with those prior statements regarding the wire. That opportunity was present during cross-examination. I don't think an additional voir dire is required. I think we have met the standards under Martinez and would ask that we be permitted to use the transcript merely as a demonstrative aid with the cautionary instruction that Your Honor would give.
Well, cautionary instruction definitely will be given as it pertains to this recording since the beginning. I believe the defense has already raised previously up to 30 minutes of the beginning of the recording cannot be heard. So on that basis alone, cautionary will be given. The other point about the transcript that would potentially be under the video matching what the court reporter has actually prepared, I do believe is a fair one. And it cannot be inaccurate in any way if it's going to be used even as a demonstrative. Ms. Myers?
Just to clarify, I believe in her trial last year, Ms. Magbanawad, clips were played. Obviously, we were not there, but I believe, well, we were not arguing. I believe Ms. Dugan presented them to Ms. Magbanawad and said, "Did you hear that? What did you mean by that?" And Ms. Magbanawad's response, time and time again, was, "I didn't hear that." So she was given that opportunity. She did testify under oath, but she could not hear it. And that doesn't even account for all of the statements by Ms. Magbanawad and Mr. Adelson on the recording that cannot be heard. So I think that if the transcript is given as in the version that the state wants to use, those words become the evidence because those words are the ones that the jury is likely to fixate upon. And then with the ellipses and the dashes, as I said, it does suggest that there's more there, but it doesn't really matter. When in fact, there's more there, but nobody can hear it.
No, Ms. Myers, I am in agreement with you. That part has to be accurate. If it's going to be used, there's not going to be any guesswork. The foundation, though, for using this as demonstrative aid can be laid among multiple witnesses. Ms. Magbanawad has already provided the initial layer with authenticating the transcript is accurate and correct. Any further foundation that needs to be laid for the introduction of demonstrative aid, the state will have to properly lay. But as far as using the demonstrative, it has to be accurate in all respects. Ms. Kappelman, do you understand what I'm saying?
I think what you're saying, Your Honor, is that you'd like the word inaudible to be present on the demonstrative if it's present in the transcript.
That is correct.
Okay.
Before it's shown to the jury, if the defense wishes to engage in any further voir dire with the witnesses that are going to lay the foundation on this topic, I'll allow them to do so. But as far as considering her past trial testimony for the basis of making this ruling, she has testified under oath in this trial that the transcript is accurate and correct. The court will accept that representation. She was subject to cross-examination. If the defense is going to call her again to dispute this point or for some other relevant purpose, you have the ability to do so. All right. Let's bring him in. Everyone can be seated. What's that? Okay, go ahead and pass them out.
Anybody else?
Good morning, members of the jury. We are going to continue with the examination of Sergeant Corbett. Last night when we left off, the state finished its direct examination. The defense is now going to have its opportunity to cross-examine him. When the defense is ready, you may examine.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sergeant Corbett, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Now, you testified yesterday about phone records.
I did, yes, sir.
Okay. Phone records are only kept for a certain amount of time, right?
That's correct.
So you subpoenaed these records back in the 2014, 15, 16 timeframe, right?
Yes, most of the records would have been obtained primarily in the 2014, 2015. Those additional records obtained just prior to the intercept.
In the PowerPoint presentation that you showed yesterday, there was no new data in there since the arrests of Sigfredo Garcia, Luis Rivera, and Katie Magbanoa back in 2016, correct?
In the presentation, we have no new data.
Let me ask it differently. The presentation may have changed,
Correct.
but you didn't receive any new data since that point in time.
That's correct.
So everything in that presentation you had back in 2016.
Yes, we should have.
And you're aware that Mr. Adelson wasn't arrested until 2022, right?
Yes.
So it's fair to say that whatever is in your presentation, someone didn't think it was enough to arrest Mr. Adelson, correct?
Objection to speculation and relevance.
Relevance.
I'll move on. When you're doing your analysis, you are just plopping data in and looking for patterns, right?
That's one of the things I do, yes.
It's hard, believe me.
I know.
Okay. And let me say this: the amount of work was tremendous in putting this investigation together, correct?
It was, yes.
The amount of work in 2014 and 2015 in going through bus videos and ATM videos and SunPass records and phone records must have been thousands and thousands of man hours, right?
Yes,
And ultimately you got the two shooters, correct?
we did.
As well as Katie Magbanoa, right?
Yes.
And those records led you right to them, but it was a lot of work and amazing work, right?
It was a thorough and complete investigation, yes.
Amongst a lot of agencies, right?
Yes.
Now, when Charlie Adelson was arrested in 2022, the phone companies no longer had records for 2013 or 2014, right?
It would depend on which company. Some would, yes.
But AT&T didn't, correct?
AT&T may have, yes.
Well, if I told you they didn't, would you believe me?
Yes,
And if you don't have the phone records, you also don't have cell site data, right?
that's correct.
And so if you don't have the phone records and you don't have the cell site data, you're limited to the phone records that you have, right?
Correct.
And your records began in May of 2014, right? Your phone records.
Yes.
So if we wanted to see the patterns of these calls at time periods before May of 2014, we are not able to do so, correct?
That's correct.
Now,
One moment. Whoever's phone is going off, turn it off or leave the courtroom. Please continue.
thank you, Your Honor. Now, I think you said on direct that when you look at the call detail records, there's sometimes duplication.
There is, yes.
So sometimes one call will look like three calls.
Yes.
And cell site data, you talked about it a little bit on direct. Cell site data isn't for every single call, right?
No, we do not have cell site data for every call. If the call does not reach the handset, then we would see a record of that attempt, but there may not be cell site data associated with that particular event.
And with text messages, sometimes you can get cell site data and sometimes you can't, right?
It's largely dependent upon the carrier. Certain carriers do provide cell site location for text messages and others do not. For instance, Verizon.
What about AT&T?
AT&T does provide location information with text messages.
But in your call detail records, aren't there instances where there are text messages and there's no cell site data associated with those text messages?
So again, there may be attempted messages that do not reach the handset where there may not be location. And then we kind of talk about text messages as a singular thing, but really we have messages that are completed through the carrier that go through the carrier's network. And then we have things such as iMessage, which from Apple devices, iOS devices, that don't go through the normal carrier network. And so we don't see records at all for those in the call detail records that the carrier provides. So there are a lot of messages that we see for which there is no associated location information or events in the carrier records.
Okay, and it's scary that I'm doing this with you with my technological inefficiencies, but let's talk about iMessages a little bit. So iMessages are when an iPhone user is speaking to an iPhone user through text messages, correct?
Yes.
So if Charlie Adelson and his parents are messaging each other, it will often go through iMessages, right?
That's correct.
And associated with that, you wouldn't see cell site data, correct?
That's correct.
Now, SunPass records, you got them in 2014, right? In 2015.
I was not the one who received those directly, so I don't know exactly when they were obtained.
Okay. But you testified to some SunPass records yesterday, right?
I don't believe that we did.
Are you aware that in 2022, you can't get SunPass records back in 2014?
I was not.
Let's talk about frequency reports. And you mentioned this a bit yesterday, but I want to make sure it's clear. You said that one thing that you look at as an investigator is frequency reports, right? Meaning the amount of times that people are calling each other.
Yes.
And you said that you're looking at that to see if there are co-conspirators. I think that's one of the words you used, right?
And that is one of the things we're looking for. Yes.
Okay. But frequency reports can also be seen between wife and husband, girlfriend and boyfriend, mother and son, and daughter and father, right?
Correct.
So the fact that a mother and a son and a girlfriend and a boyfriend call each other a lot doesn't necessarily make them co-conspirators. Is that fair to say?
That's fair.
Depends on your perspective, correct?
Yes.
Now, these calls and call logs and frequency reports, they don't tell you what people are actually saying, right?
The records that I have from the carriers, no, we have no content with that.
You're just seeing the calls.
Yes.
And you're just seeing or looking for some patterns.
Yes.
But sometimes those patterns can bring about false positives or false assumptions, right?
Well, the patterns are what they are. The communications happened. They're there in the records. Their relevance or meaning is, could be varied.
And their relevance or meaning sometimes determined by guesswork, right?
I wouldn't say guesswork.
Assumptions.
I think the call patterns are looked at in conjunction with other information, other evidence, other things that are going on at the time, and the totality of that would lend whatever relevance to those calling patterns.
Fair enough. So let's look at the totality of these calls. Okay. So let's start with July 1. And from July 1, you can tell from text messages that there was an incident between Sigfredo Garcia and Charlie Adelson, right?
Yes.
And so what I'm going to be talking to you about today is not only your report and your call records, but in trying to find out the patterns, you looked at Mr. Adelson's and other people's text messages, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And you can see from those text messages that this confrontation between Sigfredo Garcia and Mr. Adelson caused a lot of stress. You can see that, right, in the text messages.
Yes.
For instance, you can see in the text messages that for the only time in your investigation, there's text messages from Charlie Adelson's dad to Charlie Adelson after midnight.
I don't know that that's the only time, but it could be.
Well, you would agree that at 12:38 in the morning, his dad texts Charlie and says, "Are you home?" And Charlie says, "Yes, home safe." And the dad has a thumbs up. Do you agree with that? When you went through your investigation, you saw that, correct?
Well, I certainly don't remember every one of the tens of thousands of messages, but I can look it up real quick and confirm that.
May I
But
approach, Your Honor? And it goes to the next page.
and are these times adjusted?
They are adjusted.
Okay. Yeah. So it's either 12:38 or 8 o'clock in the evening.
It's 12:38.
I can confirm that as well.
It's on the second.
Okay.
Judge, while he's looking that up, could we have the sidebar?
May I approach? may continue with your examination.
Did that refresh your recollection?
I'm not finding those messages at that time. So there is a message from Harvey Adelson to Charlie, or from Charlie to Harvey saying, trying to return your call. That's at 8:10 in the evening on the 2nd. We're talking July 2nd.
We're talking July 2nd at 12:38 in the morning. If you want to look on your thing at 8:38 in the evening, that's fine as well.
It's not there either, I believe. Because I've not adjusted this.
Are you sure that you have all the text messages?
This is one of the extractions. I'm not sure where that came from. I don't recognize that format that you have.
I'll move
But
on, but are you sure that when you did this report, it included every text message received on Charlie Adelson's iCloud?
I believe that it does, yes.
But you don't have those, right?
I do not see those in what I'm looking at right here in the timeline. So
I'll move on. You talked about this June 2nd, 2014 rental car pickup. Remember
yes,
that? And during your testimony, you put Miss Magbanawa at the rental car pickup, correct?
consistent with that, yes.
If Miss Magbanawa testified yesterday that she knew nothing about the first trip and had nothing to do with renting the rental car, that would be a lie, right?
Objection to speculation and relevance.
Overruled as to relevance. Sustained as to speculation. You may rephrase if you're capable.
If she testified yesterday that she had nothing to do with being near the rental car and knowing about the first trip, that would not be consistent with your data, correct?
I don't know her testimony, but it would not be consistent with the location of the handset.
Now, Charlie Adelson's handset wasn't located anywhere near the rental car on that day, correct?
That's correct.
And in fact, looking at his text messages, you could tell that he was working as late as 9:05 that evening, correct?
Again, I don't recall the content of every message, but there was nothing that I recall associating him with the rental of the vehicle.
May I approach Your Honor, try to refresh witness's recollection?
You may.
Does this refresh your recollection that he was leaving the office at 9:05 p.m. that evening?
So about 500. This message here that you have started.
These three messages here.
There's nothing about leaving the office. There's a request to put something in a safe. Thanks again. But I don't see anything that says I'm leaving.
What's the something in a safe?
I left a container of bone on your desk. It's in a blue box that says Zimmer on it. It's about 500 in bone.
Okay. Do you know what Charlie Adelson does for a living?
I do.
What does he do? What does he do for a living?
He is a periodontist.
And does he work with bones?
He does.
Okay.
Okay, for those that are here, I hope that you can hear me. I apologize. I actually started with the wrong video. Fuck. I mean, I'm like high on cold syrup and like all that kind of crap. So sorry. Thank you guys for coming in and hanging out with me. So, okay, here we go. I made a mistake on the date that this trial started. It actually started on the 26th, I do believe it was. So here we go. We are going to go and start with the defense opening statement. Well, actually, we'll do the prosecution opening statement first. I apologize, you guys. I really do. Like I said, I'm literally, high on whatever. So. Okay, so I apologize for that. Hello, everybody. Hey, Gabriels. Goodness. Okay, let's do this again. I am not going to be talking too much through this. I'm getting like a bit of a bad cold, or not bad cold, bad cough. I've had the cold for a little while, but I'm starting to get a little bit of bad cough. So I just don't want to be coughing in your guys' faces, so to speak. I know that there's not a lot of people hanging here, and that's fine. But this is here for you guys on replay if you want to watch it. So this is a new trial that has just started, and it's kind of interesting. So maybe I will just do, K-Breeze, if you're still here, I'll do a little bit of a breakdown of this. Okay, so the guy that they're showing is the defendant, and his name is Charlie Adelson, and he is on trial for the 2014 murmur of his former brother-in-law. Florida State University law professor Dan Markel. Authorities allege that Adelson arranged the killing so his sister could move with the couple's children. So that's kind of crazy. So there we go. Anyways, thank you for watching, Gabriel. I appreciate that. Like I said, I won't be talking very much, but we can catch up on this. It's kind of crazy. So here we go, guys.
Was this defendant. This defendant was the solution to that problem because he had a girl. Let's get right to it. The reason that we're here today is because the defendant in this case, Charlie Adelson, hired a hitman to kill his former brother-in-law, Dan Markel. This murder was set into motion because back in 2014, the defendant's family, the Adelson family, had a big problem. And that big problem was Dan Markel. And the solution to that problem was this defendant. This defendant was the solution to that problem because he had a girlfriend with connections to the type of people who were willing and capable of pointing a gun at a complete stranger and pulling the trigger. The victim in this case was known as Danny to his friends and family. He was a loving father to two little boys. He was a highly respected professor at Florida State College of Law. And tragically, on July 18th of 2014, Dan Markel was shot twice in the head in broad daylight in the driveway of his home in the Benton Hills neighborhood here in Tallahassee. The last day of Dan Markel's life that day began like any other of his mornings that summer. He woke up, he drove his two little boys to preschool and dropped them off, and then he drove over to the gym to work out. After finishing his workout, he returned home. He pulled in his driveway, opened his garage, but little did he know that throughout his just normal routine that morning, he was being followed. He was being followed by two hired hitmen who traveled all the way from Miami to Tallahassee for the sole purpose of murdering him. And just like something out of a horror movie, he pulls into his driveway and the car that, unknown to him, pulls in right behind him. Moments later, Dan Markel's neighbor heard a gunshot. He looked out the window and he saw a light-colored Toyota Prius backing quickly out of Dan Markel's driveway and then speeding away. The neighbor waited for a couple minutes to see if maybe Dan Markel came out of his house or backed out of his driveway too. And when nothing happened, this neighbor got that funny feeling that maybe something could be wrong here. So he walked over, and what he found was a gruesome scene. He walked in the garage and saw that the driver's side window of Dan Markel's car was shattered. He saw Dan Markel was still behind the wheel. He was alive, but he was moaning. He was unresponsive, and he was terribly injured. The neighbor then goes and calls 911. Law enforcement arrives, and they find Dan Markel unresponsive with gunshot wounds to his head. He was then taken to the hospital where he survived for several hours before he was actually pronounced dead. Dan Markel was 41 years old, and his little boys that were deprived of their father that day were just 3 and 4 years old. Law enforcement immediately began to investigate to figure out who shot Dan Markel. And the evidence they find sets them down two separate paths. One path is that they had to track down that light-colored Prius that the neighbors saw fleeing from the crime scene and identify who was inside that Prius. And the other path relates to Dan Markel's personal life. They looked to see who, if anybody, in Dan Markel's personal life would hate Dan Markel enough to kill him. And after years of tireless investigation by law enforcement, both of these two paths led directly to this defendant. So let's talk about the path involving Dan Markel's personal life first. In looking at who might have a motive to kill Dan Markel, law enforcement learned that Markel was entangled in a very nasty divorce with his ex-wife, who is the defendant's sister. Her name is Wendi Adelson. A review of their divorce case file revealed that Wendi Adelson asked the court to allow her to move back to Miami, where she was from, with the kids, in order to be near her parents, whose names are Harvey and Donna Adelson, and her brother, the defendant. Dan Markel was adamantly opposed to his children being relocated to Miami. He was a law professor here in Tallahassee. This is where he lived. This is where his kids have been raised. He wanted his kids to live here with him. And for this custody dispute, the judge ended up ruling in Dan Markel's favor. So Wendi Adelson was not permitted to move to Miami with the children. Unless, of course, something happened to Dan Markel. A review of Wendi Adelson's emails revealed that her mother, Donna Adelson, hated Dan Markel and was desperate to find a way for Wendi and her children, who were Donna Adelson's grandchildren, to be able to move to Miami. Donna Adelson suggests in these emails that y'all will hear about several ways that Wendi Adelson could threaten or bully Dan Markel into submission, into getting what she wanted him to do. Donna Adelson even suggested offering Dan Markel a $1 million bribe to allow the relocation, and even said that this defendant, Charlie Adelson, would pay a third of that $1 million bribe to Dan Markel to make that happen. The evidence in this case will show that Donna Adelson's closest confidant was her son, the defendant. She and the defendant talked multiple times a day, every day. He was the person with whom she would constantly vent and complain to about Wendi's situation. The defendant was also the person that Donna Adelson relied on to solve her problems. And this was a big, big problem for Donna Adelson. And she made it the defendant's problem to solve. So the divorce between Wendi Adelson and Dan Markel was final about a year before the actual murder. But that was not the end of that case. Litigation was ongoing, to say the least. Each side would continue to routinely file violations of the custody agreement, violations of the settlement agreement, and that continued right up until Dan Markel's death in July of 2014. This was a highly emotionally charged situation between them leading up to his death. However, there was no physical violence that Wendi Adelson needed to be rescued from or anything like that. But make no mistake, this was a very messy custody dispute. Shortly before the murder, in fact, Dan Markel, the victim, filed with the court and basically asked the court, he alleged that Donna Adelson was disparaging him to his children by saying bad things about him. And he asked the court to enter an order preventing Donna Adelson from having unsupervised contact with her grandchildren. This motion was still pending in court when Dan Markel was killed. The murder of Dan Markel ensured that an adverse ruling on his motion would never be a problem for the Adelsons. And just about 48 hours after the shooting, Wendi Adelson and the little boys relocated to Miami. Shortly thereafter, moved into a home within walking distance of the Adelsons' Miami home. Within a year of Dan Markel's murder, Wendi Adelson legally changed Dan Markel's son's last name from Markel to Adelson. And just like that, their father was just effectively erased from their lives at 3 and 4. And the Adelsons family, their big problem had been solved. You'll hear during this trial that the Adelsons are a very tight-knit family. The defendant and his parents, Harvey and Donna Adelson, they actually even all worked together at the Adelson Institute, which was their family's dental practice. At the Adelson Institute, the defendant and Harvey Adelson were dentists, and Donna Adelson managed the office. After Dan Markel was killed on July 18, 2014, law enforcement interviewed Wendi Adelson. And Wendi Adelson acknowledged that her family had a motive to kill Dan Markel or to want him dead. She admitted that her brother, the defendant, had even said that he looked into hiring a hitman to kill Dan Markel as a divorce present to her, but he decided to buy her a TV instead because it was cheaper. And coincidentally, or not, that TV that this defendant bought his sister as a divorce gift instead of hiring a hitman would be Wendi Adelson's alibi for the morning of the murder when the victim was killed by a hitman. So this path of looking into Dan Markel's life to see who would have a motive to want him dead leads law enforcement to the Adelsons, including this defendant, a man who told his family that he'd looked into hiring a hitman to kill Dan Markel. The defense asked yesterday in jury selection, who's talked trash or heard somebody talk trash about an in-law, which is not a rare concept. A lot of people don't like their in-laws. But the difference here is that the defendant's comment stopped being just a little bit of trash talk when Dan Markel was actually killed by a hitman. While the police are trying to investigate, who in Dan Markel's personal life may have a motive to kill him, they're simultaneously going down that second path I described to y'all, which was tracking down the vehicle that the neighbor saw fleeing the crime scene. When law enforcement retraced Dan Markel's steps the morning of the murder, they uncovered some chilling surveillance video of a Prius fitting the description of the one seen by the neighbor, following Dan Markel into the Premier Gym parking lot, waiting for an hour while he was inside, and then following him home from Premier Gym back to his neighborhood. They got these surveillance images from city buses, from Premier, from everywhere they possibly could. And these surveillance images, coupled with a massive amount of phone data and SunPass records gathered in this case, helped police to eventually track down the exact car used in this crime. But police still had to figure out who was in the Prius and why did they kill Dan Markel. As part of this really painstaking review that law enforcement did of all of these records, and when I say painstaking, finding this Prius and finding all of this evidence and all of these records was not an easy task, and it took longer than your average investigation. It was very difficult to do. They combed through tons of phone records and even did what's called a tower dump, which is where law enforcement collected a list of all of the cell phone numbers that communicated with the cell tower that serviced different spots in Tallahassee that Dan Markel was at that morning, including Premier Gym, when the suspect's Prius were there. Because they thought if the person in the Prius was using their phone at the time, then their number will be somewhere in this tower dump. They combed through all of that data, and they found a number with a Miami area code belonging to a man named Sigfredo Garcia. Law enforcement examined all of Garcia's call logs and saw that he was in frequent contact with another number that was also present at Premier Gym that morning. And that number belonged to a man named Luis Rivera. Luis Rivera is a lifelong friend of Sigfredo Garcia and is also from Miami. Police then looked at all of Garcia and Rivera's phone records, which showed that their phones left Miami about 2 days before this murder on July 16th of 2014. The phones came to Tallahassee, and on the day of the murder, July 18th, they followed Markel to Premier Gym. The phone data is consistent with both men turning off their phones just minutes before the murder and leaving their phones off until about an hour or so after the murder, when they're well on their way back towards Miami. And then a bank's ATM camera caught both Garcia and Rivera in that light-colored Prius once they arrived back in the Miami area when they stopped at an ATM. So, police figured out the identity, and this should appear on the screens in front of you. The identity of the two men responsible for following and killing Dan Markel. Luis Rivera, his nickname is Tato, and Sigfredo Garcia, his nickname is Tudo. But they continued to look for evidence of why two seemingly random men came all the way to Tallahassee to kill a man, Dan Markel, that they'd never met. You know, what or who is the connection between these killers and the victim? Well, phone records reveal that one of Sigfredo Garcia's most frequent contacts was a woman named Catherine McManua. Her nickname is Katie. Garcia and Catherine McManua have a long history of an on-again, off-again relationship over the course of many years, and they actually share 2 kids in common. And lo and behold, when looking at the phone records, Catherine McManua is also one of the most frequent contacts of this defendant, Charlie Adelson. Law enforcement learned that at the time of Dan Markel's murder, this defendant was dating Catherine McManua. She was his girlfriend at the time. So Dan Markel was a problem that this defendant needed to solve for his family. The defendant was looking to hire a hitman to kill Dan Markel. Dan Markel ends up being killed by a hitman. And who ended up being the hitman? It was someone with a close relationship to this defendant's girlfriend. The hitman was the father of his girlfriend's children. So you can see how both leads in this case, followed by investigators, both of them charted paths to this defendant. Not only did looking into the motive lead law enforcement to the defendant because he wanted to hire someone to kill Dan Markel, but looking into the car, fleeing the scene, also led law enforcement to the defendant through his girlfriend at the time. So 2 different investigations arriving at the same conclusion. Law enforcement also tried to follow the money in this case. And that was a third way that the evidence in this case points to this defendant. Law enforcement reviewed bank records, employment records, DHS-MV records of all of the suspects and saw that in the months after the homicide, Sigfredo Garcia, Luis Rivera, and Catherine Magbanua all acquired some big ticket items. Rivera and Garcia both bought motorcycles and cars. Catherine Magbanua got a breast augmentation surgery and later received a black Lexus sedan whose previous owner was Harvey Adelson. Catherine Magbanua's bank records were analyzed, and there was no check ever written or matching cash withdrawal for the car or the breast augmentation, which was paid for in cash. Bank records also showed that Catherine Magbanua's account had a huge spike in cash deposits right around the time of the murder. She deposited more money into her account in the 5 weeks following the murder than in the entire previous year before the murder. This was during a time when there was no record of her being employed anywhere. Also, about 2 months after the murder, the defendant added Catherine Magbanua to the payroll at the Adelson Institute. And she began receiving regular checks from their business account every 2 weeks for 2 years after the murder. And this was despite the fact that she did not work at the Adelson Institute. So the money was talking, but what were the suspects saying? That's what law enforcement wanted to know. So as they're examining the phone records in this case, they see a distinct pattern surrounding important events and dates in this case. The phone calls, and they can't see the content, they can't hear the content of these calls in these phone records, but they see that the calls are occurring. And the phone calls always went from Donna Adelson to the defendant, then from the defendant to Catherine Magbanua, then from Catherine Magbanua to Sigfredo Garcia, and back the other way. Kind of like train cars, they only touch the car right in front of them. You know, Donna Adelson never calls Catherine Magbanua or Sigfredo Garcia. Charlie Adelson never calls Sigfredo Garcia, or vice versa. So if this is a murder for hire, as law enforcement suspects, could it be that the defendant was wisely insulating himself from the actual shooters by having Catherine Magbanua act as a middleman between them? Law enforcement decided to launch an undercover investigation designed to clarify who the members of the conspiracy were and how information traveled within this conspiracy. So police applied for and received court authorization to listen in real time to the phone calls of the defendant and Catherine Magbanua. And this is what's known as a wiretap. By this point, the point that the law enforcement received authorization to do this wiretap, it was April of 2016. So it's been not quite, but almost 2 years since the murder of Dan Markel, which occurred in July of 2014. So by April of 2016, the defendant and Catherine Magbanua are no longer dating at that point. They've been broken up since the fall of 2014. Catherine Magbanua is actually back together with Sigfredo Garcia, the father of her children, at that point. The defendant has moved on to many other girlfriends since Catherine Magbanua, but the defendant and Catherine Magbanua are still in regular communication and have remained very close friends since the murder. And Rivera, who was the second hitman in that Prius, He, in April of 2016, was actually in federal prison doing time on another charge unrelated to this murder. So all of the members of this conspiracy have presumably gone on with their lives, believing they've gotten away with this murder. So even though law enforcement has authority to listen to their calls now, what reason would these people have to still be discussing the murder at this point? So police needed to stage an event that would generate conversation between the conspirators about the murder. And the plan was to send an undercover agent posing as somebody on behalf of Luis Rivera, who was incarcerated, to walk up to Donna Adelson on the street and try to extort money out of her. And law enforcement refers to this as the bump. So this undercover agent walks up to Donna Adelson one day as she's leaving the Adelson Institute during the day. The undercover agent hands Donna Adelson a piece of paper. And on the piece of paper is an article about the murder of Dan Markel with his picture on it and, FSU professor killed. Also on the piece of paper are a phone number and the amount of $5,000. The undercover agent tells Donna Adelson that he knows that the Adelsons are taking care of Katie, and he's there to extort money out of her on Rivera's behalf in order to even things out. The undercover agent never says the defendant's name or anything about the defendant's involvement to Donna Adelson. Then law enforcement listens to see what will happen next. Will Donna Adelson go straight to the police to report this extortion attempt, or will something else entirely happen? As suspected, based on the previously observed communication pattern, the first person that Donna Adelson calls after the bump is the defendant. Despite the fact that the undercover agent never mentioned the defendant to her. On that first call, one would think that Donna Adelson would say to her son, it's so crazy. Some man came up to me and he's handed me this article about Danny's murder, and he's seems like he's demanding money from us. She never says any of that. In fact, she never says Dan Markel's name at all. Instead, she tells the defendant that she needs to talk to him in person, not over the phone, about some paperwork that was hand-delivered to her. She said that this paperwork, she says this to the defendant, it involves the two of us, and that he should know what she's talking about. She says that he should bring cash to their meeting. And she also says that this TV is about 5. Donna Adelson tells the defendant that the man who approached her mentioned an ex-girlfriend. Donna Adelson never says which ex-girlfriend she's referring to. She never says Catherine McBanois or Katie's name to the defendant in that phone call. She only says that the blackmailer mentioned an ex-girlfriend. The defendant never asks his mom, whose ex-girlfriend? My ex-girlfriend? Which ex-girlfriend? He never asked that. Because as the evidence will show, he didn't need to. He knew that this TV is about 5 meant that she was being blackmailed about Danny's murder for $5,000. And he knew that the ex-girlfriend in question was Catherine McBanois. And we know that because after this call with his mother, where's the defendant? The defendant calls Catherine McBanois. He doesn't call his most recent ex-girlfriend. He doesn't even call the most recent ex-girlfriend before the most recent ex-girlfriend, the one before that. No, he calls Catherine McBanois. And his call to Catherine McBanois is the only call that he makes to any ex-girlfriend after getting the information from his mother that the blackmailer mentioned an ex-girlfriend. And he had not dated Catherine McBanois for 1.5 years at that point. And although the defendant threatens to do it often, neither he nor his mom ever report the matter to the police. The only people that he discusses it with in these calls is Donna Adelson and Catherine McBanois. And you'll hear these phone calls between the conspirators. And as you listen to these calls, y'all will notice that they are being cautious about what they say over the phone. It's very apparent that they are very careful with their words because they are immediately suspicious that law enforcement could be listening to their conversations. So Donna Adelson calls the defendant, and the defendant's first call is to Catherine McBanois. After that, the defendant then meets up with his mom in person, like his mom requested. And his mom gives him this paperwork that the undercover agent gave her. Then next, the defendant and Catherine McBanois meet up in person. And they meet up at a restaurant in Miami called Dolce Vita. And while they sat at their table in this, Dolce Vita is a busy, noisy restaurant, an undercover FBI agent sat at a table nearby with a hidden camera in their bag and recorded this conversation. And in the recording, we hear the defendant discussing whether the man who walked up to his mom could be an undercover police officer or someone who's trying to blackmail them. And if it's the latter, if it's a blackmailer, is it somebody who's just trying to make a quick buck, or is it somebody who actually knows information from the inside? The defendant reassures Catherine McBanois that if it is the police, that's a good thing. The defendant thinks that if it's the police, that means that they do not have enough evidence to charge anybody. In fact, the defendant tells her, if they had any evidence, we would have already gone to the airport. The defendant starts giving her some legal advice. He says that, hey, in order to prove that someone committed a crime, you have to be able to put the person at the scene of the crime at the time it was committed, which unfortunately for them is not an accurate statement of the law. It's important to note too, at the time of this conversation at Dolce Vita, no arrests had been made. The only thing that police had released to the public was a photo of the Prius that fled the scene. This was the Prius that Garcia and Rivera rented and used the day of Dan Markel's murder. So police knew at that point that it was Garcia and Rivera who were in the Prius, but the public did not know that yet, and no arrests had been made because they wanted to do this undercover investigation. And so the fact that this photo of this Prius had been released to the public is interesting in light of some of the things that y'all will hear the defendant say to Catherine McBanois in the Dolce Vita recording. He starts giving Catherine McBanois several analogies, all involving rental cars used to commit crimes. He reassures her that, hey, if DNA is found in a car, all that means is that at one point the person sat in the car. And if that car was later used in a crime, police can't prove that just from a person's DNA being in the car. The defendant points out to her that if a rental car is found that was at a crime scene, police also have to prove who was driving it at the time. He gives her a very relevant hypothetical of her renting a car in Miami and someone asking to borrow it and driving to Orlando to commit a robbery, and how she would be innocent in that hypothetical because she wasn't in the car at the time of the robbery. So through these analogies, the defendant is reassuring Catherine McBanois that even if police identify who rented the car that fled the scene, they still would not have enough evidence to hold anybody responsible for the murder, even if they did find out it was Garcia and Rivera. The defendant also says that crimes are tough to prove unless someone actually witnessed the suspect commit a crime, or a suspect makes a confession, or a suspect is caught on a wire talking about the crime. So the defendant's trying to reassure her about the lack of evidence. And hey, as long as we all stay quiet, then we don't have anything to worry about. At one point, the defendant asked her, let me ask you a question. And then he asked her about money. He says, when everybody was there the next day, did you take any money? Like, are any of you driving around in a Bentley? Or no, it's not like any of you are driving around in a Bentley or cruising around in a mega yacht. So here the defendant's pointing out that the money wasn't used to buy anything flashy that would draw the attention of the police. And when discussing, and you all will hear during the course of this trial why his statement or his question about the money from the next day is particularly important. The evidence will show that Catherine Magbanua went to the defendant's home the night of the murder, where he paid her in cash. And the next day, Catherine Magbanua paid Garcia and Rivera their cuts of the money. When discussing the possibility of whether this is actually some gangster trying to blackmail his family for money, the defendant says that whoever this person is, whoever it is, knows information. The defendant told Catherine Magbanua that there are two ways of dealing with this guy. They could call the police, but then the guy blackmailing them would be charged with trying to blackmail his family. And the blackmailer would start talking, and he would start calling out Catherine Magbanua's name. And then police are going to be asking questions about what happened. The other option is to pay the blackmailer, but let him know that this is a one-time thing, and try to scare the blackmailer off by saying, hey, if you come around again, we're going to the police. So the defendant then gives Catherine Magbanua very precise instructions. He wants her to call the blackmailer and tell him that, this would be what he wants Catherine Magbanua to say. My friends, meaning the Adelson family, have no idea what you're talking about. And I don't have any idea what you're talking about either. But the name of the person who you said is incarcerated sounds familiar. So I'm going to give you this money as charity to help the less fortunate, but don't contact these people again, or they're going to go to the police. And the defendant said he would give Catherine Magbanua the $5,000 to pay off the blackmailer, except he's concerned, though, that this won't resolve the issue for good. The defendant is worried that this guy is not going to go away, that he's going to keep coming back for more and more money. And the defendant offers a solution to have this blackmailer killed. And he says he's willing to pay whatever it takes. The defendant tells her that, this is the defendant talking to Catherine Magbanua, this guy, meaning the blackmailer, is effing with him and his wife. And you'd better kill him or he's going to be a big problem because he knows who you are. And the defendant then says, if he can't handle this, I'll have somebody else do it. The defendant says, so help me God, if they fuck with my family, it's going to be Nazi shit because this will be done. I mean, Katie, I don't care what I spend. It's important to note during this conversation and the entire wiretap, the defendant never says Sigfredo Garcia's name. But the evidence will show that the defendant was talking about Sigfredo Garcia when the defendant says that the blackmailer was effing with him and his wife. And if he can't do it, I'll find someone else who will. Because immediately after that, the defendant checks with Catherine Magbanua to make sure that Garcia has no hard feelings towards him, no reason not to help him. He says, hey, I have you on salary. You think he'd be happy about that? And he also says, I mean, our paths never crossed, meaning, hey, Garcia wasn't in the picture when he and Catherine McMahon were together. There wasn't any overlap. After hearing that the defendant wants someone killed and is willing to pay whatever it takes to get it done, Catherine McMahon then asked the defendant to help her out. And the defendant reassures her that she'll be taken care of by saying, he says, I don't have to. Sometimes his chairs can be a little wobbly. I know this has taken a bit, but I'm almost done. Thank y'all for being patient. All right, so she asked him to help her out. And the defendant reassures her that she'll be taken care of. He says he doesn't have to tell her the things that he'll do for her. He shows her what he'll do for her. She doesn't have to ask him for anything. He looks for things to do. He says, hey, when someone's birthday's coming up or there's car problems, she doesn't have to ask. He looks for ways to help. And after his meeting with Catherine McMahon, the defendant immediately calls Donna Adelson to let her know that everything's fine. And he does this using some pretty obvious code words, which y'all will hear. And you will hear the conspirators often use words to mask the meaning of what they're actually talking about. Catherine McMahon then, also using these code words, tasks Garcia with calling the number on the paperwork and finding out if a blackmailer is a legitimate associate of Rivera or not. And in the series of recorded calls that follow, you guys are going to hear these conspirators talking and using words like TV, false leads, listings, properties, clients, rap songs, CDs, pot-bellied pigs, relationship advice, all these different terms that are normal terms any of us may use, but they're used in context in these calls that if you're listening to the conversation, do not make any sense. For example, in the calls, the defendant and Catherine McMahon don't outright debate the pros and cons of whether they should pay this blackmailer. Instead, they talk about the fact that this property is cheap. They might expect a property like this to even be $1 million. This property seems like a great deal, but if you get the wrong tenant in there, the tenant may keep increasing the rent, and that tenant may become a leech that never leaves you. So it will be up to y'all to decide whether this defendant is actually worried about a future tenant of a property that might raise the rent and pay him more money, or if the defendant is actually worried that if he pays off the blackmailer, then the blackmailer may continue to come back again and again, or send a cousin or a friend to become a leech that never leaves him, that he can't get rid of. In another of these calls, the defendant tells Catherine McMahon that whoever this person is, this blackmailer is, he's got a lot of effing details. And in another, they discuss the fact that this blackmailer is not from the inside. And the defendant says that this guy is probably not from the first layer, but the second layer. So not someone who got info from Garcia, but maybe somebody who got info from Rivera. But one fact, and let me just say, as the jury, you all will interpret and decide what they're really talking about in these calls. Only y'all can determine the meaning and the weight to give this evidence. And only you can separate just mere coincidences from evidence in a conspiracy. But one fact, though, is really clear throughout these calls, is that all of these conspirators are hopeful that this blackmailer is law enforcement just trying to get information, because they think if it's law enforcement and the police don't have enough to bring charges, just fishing for information versus the other possibility, which would obviously be much worse for them, that the Adelsons are being blackmailed by somebody who actually knows inside information about their roles in Dan Markel's murder and may tell the police what they know. So, after this undercover operation, which was in 2016, Luis Rivera, Sigfredo Garcia, and Catherine McBanois are arrested. They're charged with the same charges before y'all in this trial. And Luis Rivera ended up cutting a deal with the state to tell law enforcement the truth about the murder of Dan Markel and the people responsible. Rivera told law enforcement that he was hired by Sigfredo Garcia to help kill Dan Markel. And Rivera described how Garcia told him that Catherine McBanois, the mother of Garcia's children, secured this job for them. And the job was in Tallahassee, and it paid $100,000, with Rivera's being about a third of it, $35,000. Rivera explained that he and Garcia actually made 2 trips to Tallahassee with the intent of killing Dan Markel. The first one was a month before the murder. It was in June of 2014. And the second was when Dan Markel was actually killed in July of 2014. Rivera said that he bought a gun off the street for that second trip, and Garcia rented a car. For the June trip. Rivera bought a gun off the street, and Garcia rented the car for that trip. Garcia and Rivera did some scouting on that trip of Dan Markel's residence, some surveillance, but ultimately couldn't get the job done. They ended heading back to Miami. During the trip to Tallahassee, he said that Garcia had a piece of paper with a picture of the man that they were supposed to kill on it, and some handwritten notes as well. Cell phone records corroborated Rivera's information about the June trip. Rivera also told a story about an incident in Tallahassee where he and Garcia were riding down the road in the rented Prius, and Garcia accidentally discharged the murder weapon, and the bullet struck the floorboard of the Prius. Law enforcement tracked down that actual Prius again and were able to see evidence in the undercarriage that corroborated Rivera's information about the accidental discharge. So they're looking at the phone evidence, they're trying to find whatever they can to kind of corroborate what he's telling them. I mentioned earlier that both men, Garcia and Rivera, cut their phones off from the time that they left Premier and kept them off until well after the murder when they're on their way back home. Rivera said that the first call that either of them made after the homicide was from Garcia to McBanois, where Garcia told her that the job was done. And McBanois assured them that they would get their money the next day, which they did. Rivera says when Catherine McBanois brought cash to him at his home. And all this information that Luis Rivera provided them was corroborated by, including when the money was dropped off, was corroborated by cell phone records in this case. Luis Rivera told police that the next day after the murder, he was paid in cash by Catherine McBanois, and that the money was packaged in a very unusual way. The money was in stacks of $100 bills, and the money was stapled together. The stacks of 100s, every $1,000 was stapled together. During this trial, y'all will hear that the defendant had access to a lot of cash, and nothing's wrong with that. He had a lot of cash because his family gives cash discounts at their dental practice, and he keeps the cash that he receives in a safe. Again, nothing wrong about that either. However, what is relevant in this case is that the defendant had a very unusual practice of keeping the cash in his safe in $1,000 stacks of $100 bills that were stapled together, just like the money Luis Rivera received. Over the last few years, since the 2016 arrests and interview of Luis Rivera, law enforcement has not stopped working on this case. there were trials in 2019 and 2022, so right before the pandemic and right after the pandemic, of co-conspirators. Law enforcement also continued to try to gather all the evidence that they possibly could. They continued to interview people who may possibly have any information about the case. They tried to clarify any audio recordings that couldn't be clearly heard. While the phone wiretaps are very clear, the wiretap conversations that took place in public places when these people were meeting in person were not clearly audible back in 2016. Some still aren't, but because these public places are often too noisy. For instance, the recording of the conversation between the defendant and Catherine McManua and Dolce Vita had too much background noise to be able to clearly hear what the conspirators were talking about. However, since 2016, as technology developed over the years, and thanks to law enforcement's just continued dedication, law enforcement eventually found an expert that was formerly employed by the CIA with improved technology and enough expertise to clarify this recording at Dolce Vita that y'all will hear. And he did that by being able to reduce as much background noise as possible. And once this recording was clarified, which was actually just early last year in 2022, the state arrested this defendant. The presentation of this evidence, as y'all can see from opening, it's a lot. It's a lot of information. It's going to take a little bit of time, and it may be tedious at times. And I want to thank y'all in advance for the careful attention to all of the evidence y'all see and hear during this trial. When you'll see that this defendant carried out his plan to hire a hitman to kill Dan Markel. He conspired and he solicited Catherine McManua to get this murder done. And he paid her for the job once it was completed. This defendant acted in furtherance of this murder plot that went beyond just thinking about it or talking about it. And these acts make him guilty as a principal to first-degree murder, just as if he pulled the trigger himself. While the defendant's choices helped solve a problem within his family, they came at a very high price. He took the life of a loving father of 2 little boys, and he caused a lifetime of grief for Dan Markel's loved ones. Y'all heard a lot in jury selection about how important this trial is to the defendant, which I'm sure it is. But Dan Markel was loved. He was a brother. He was a son. And this trial is his family's opportunity to see justice done for the person who set up their son's murder. And at the conclusion of this evidence, y'all will be convinced beyond any reasonable doubt that this defendant is guilty. And at that point, we'll ask you for the only verdict that does justice in this case, which is a verdict that the defendant is guilty as charged. Thank y'all.
My name is Dan Rashbaum, and with me is Kate Myers, and we represent Charlie Adelson. Now let me start by saying the obvious. The murder of Professor Markel was a tragedy. The world lost a brilliant legal mind. His family lost a son and a brother. This community lost its sense of security and lost a good citizen. and his 2 boys, the nephews of Charlie Adelson, lost a loving father. His senseless murder continues to be felt throughout this community and others. It was inexcusable, despicable, evil. But what I'm going to tell you today is what actually happened. You will see that Charlie Adelson had nothing to do with the murder of Professor Markel. You will see that the state cannot come close to meeting its burden. Why? Because Charlie Adelson is innocent. Now, I don't have to prove innocence. What I'm telling you, I very rarely say in a courtroom as a defense lawyer. Charlie Adelson is innocent. And we'll get there. But the next thing I'm going to tell you, I also rarely say in a courtroom. And you may be surprised to hear this from a defense lawyer. I have great respect for the prosecutors and law enforcement on this case. I have admiration for their efforts after the murder of Professor Markel in trying to find out who did it. You will see that they spent countless man-hours, cell phone tower dumps, surveillance videos from a boatload of places, buses, cameras on the street. Great law enforcement activity. And it paid off. They got the 3 killers. They convicted them. Sigfredo Garcia, convicted for life. Luis Rivera, Catherine Magbanua, convicted for life. The problem is, as you just heard, the state saw no connection between these people and Professor Markel. So from the very outset, the state suspected the Adelsons, the family. You saw the chart. It wasn't limited to Charlie Adelson. Unindicted co-conspirators in this case, the state has said it, Wendi Adelson, Donna Adelson, Harvey Adelson. The state knew, as you heard, that Wendi Adelson and Professor Markel had gone through a brutal divorce. And you're going to see it. But they couldn't find the connection. But then they had their aha moment. As you heard, they determined that at the time of the murder in 2014, Charlie Adelson was dating Catherine Magbanua. And they learned that Catherine Magbanua had had a previous relationship, on again, off again, with Sigfredo Garcia. They learned that Sigfredo Garcia and Catherine Magbanua shared 2 children together. They had their connection. The problem is, that's where the state began to guess. began to make assumptions. And you will see, we will show it, that those assumptions didn't make sense. Now, I love jigsaw puzzles. I've loved them since I'm young. The reason why I love them is because they only work if every piece fits. No matter what you do with the jigsaw puzzle, if a piece doesn't fit, it becomes a mess. You can't hammer it, and you can't ignore it. Because if you ignore it, you have holes in the puzzle. What you're going to see is with regards to this case, that's exactly what the state tried to do. They heard things, they saw things, but there were problems. They couldn't fit all the pieces together under their theories. Their theories that they told you about today. I'm going to show you how those puzzles, those pieces, they didn't fit. They don't fit. And why? Respectfully, the state does not know what happened on July 18, 2014. On that day, 2 crimes occurred. The first one, the state knows about, and that was the brutal, heinous murder of Professor Markel. The other one, they don't know about. They're about to find out like you, because that day would forever change Charlie Adelson's life. But before we get there, I like cliffhangers. It's important to give you some background and timeline of the events. Charlie Adelson is 46 years old, single with a young son. He grew up in South Florida, in Coral Springs in Broward County. His father was a dentist, a local dentist. It wasn't the Adelson Institute when Charlie was growing up. It was a small dental practice with his dad. Charlie is the middle child of 3. He is very close with his parents. As they said, he is very close with his mom. Growing up, the family was middle class. And Charlie was not particularly close with either of his siblings. He grew closer with Wendi as they got older. He went to college at the University of Central Florida, went to dental school in South Florida, and then periodontic school. When he graduated as a periodontist, he had an idea. Rather than work in his own practice, he figured that he could travel around to dental practices all over South Florida. He would be a traveling periodontist. So what you are going to learn in this case is that Charlie Adelson had practices from the very south of South Florida to as far places as Jupiter. He was in the car sometimes for hours in a day. And he worked a lot. You're going to see that. He was a workaholic. He spent a lot of time in that car. And what did he do when he was in the car to pass the time? He spoke a lot on the phone. He would talk to whoever would listen to him. And you're going to see in this case This is one thing we won't deny. Charlie Adelson likes to talk. And he likes to repeat himself. And who would he speak with the most? He'd speak with his girlfriend. He'd speak with his mom. He'd speak with his friends. Now, Wendi Adelson, who's a state witness, followed a different path. She went to a prestigious university in Boston. She then went to school in England on a Truman Fellowship, and later went to law school. She got scholarships for law school and college. Soon after starting law school, she met Dan Markel, and they fell in love. They got married. They ultimately moved to Tallahassee, where they both worked for FSU, Professor Markel as a law professor of the law school. Charlie Adelson didn't have much to do with either Professor Markel or Wendi during their marriage or before their marriage. He would talk to his sister periodically, maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks. They lived in Tallahassee for years. Charlie Adelson visited him in Tallahassee 2, maybe 3 times. Charlie loved his sister. He sought advice from her, as she did with him every once in a while. But they weren't super close. They were brother, sister. The truth is that Charlie Adelson was a little self-centered. He was building his career. See, that traveling periodontist, in the beginning, it wasn't that successful. But by the time of this case, in the 2013-2014 time period, you're going to see that Charlie Adelson was making a lot of money. His practice was booming. He was working 6, sometimes 7 days a week. You'll see it on the wires. You'll see it in text messages. He would start his day early in the morning, and most days he wouldn't get home till 8, 9, 10 at night. At the time when this murder occurred, he was not married. He had no kids. He had a lot of money. And he was living a very good life. Now, in 2012, Wendi Adelson, on a trip down to South Florida, confides in her brother that she was having problems in her marriage. She told Charlie that she and Professor Markel had been going through marriage counseling. She asked him what he thought. He said, "Look, I want you to be happy, but you have to do what's best for you. I'm here to listen." Charlie had no involvement whatsoever in Wendi's decision to divorce Professor Markel. You'll hear that. And in September of 2012, Wendi filed for divorce. And you're going to hear about how she filed for the divorce, and you're going to learn that Charlie had no involvement in her leaving the house, had nothing to do with him. But we got to talk about TVs. And you're going to hear a lot about TVs in this case. Excuse me. See, Charlie has a really bad history of telling bad jokes. So when Wendi left the house, his mom told him that she didn't have a TV. He asked her, he said, "What can I do to help Wendi? She's moved to a new place. She's left most of the stuff behind. What can I do to help?" And his mom said, "She doesn't have a TV." He said, "Okay, when you go to Tallahassee, go to Best Buy, buy a TV for Wendi, and I'll pay you for it." And so Wendi got the TV, and she called Charlie. This is back in 2012. The murder's in 2014. And she thanked him for the TV. And he didn't say he looked into hiring a hitman. He joked, a bad joke. And he said it was cheaper than hiring a hitman. Now, not only was it a bad joke, but you're going to hear in this trial, Charlie repeated the joke. He repeated it a lot to a lot of people. You're going to hear that he repeated it as late as March of 2014. So the man that they think hired a hitman is joking to others about hiring a hitman. Puzzle pieces. And you're going to learn why his repeating of that joke is going to be so important. I'm going to tell you in a little bit. Keep in the back of your mind. But let's first go back to the divorce. The divorce was bitter. It was emotional. Wendi Adelson and Professor Markel, they'd have good times. But when things were bad, they would fight about everything. And in January of 2013, Wendi Adelson filed a motion to relocate to South Florida with her two boys. That motion was opposed by Professor Markel. Now, what you're going to learn in this trial is that Wendi Adelson never thought that motion would be granted. Her lawyer told her that motion would never be granted. But she said, let's give it a shot. Charlie had very little to do with the motion. He knew she was filing it. He knew she didn't have much chance of getting it. And the motion was denied. When it was denied, it didn't change Charlie Adelson's life one bit. But unlike Charlie, his mom and dad were upset. They were upset because their daughter had a job opportunity in South Florida. She had no family support in Tallahassee, and they wanted her home. And you will see that Don and Harvey Adelson are very involved in their children's lives. We won't run away from that. You will see that Donna Adelson and Harvey came up with a lot of crazy ideas. I mean, crazy ideas. You're going to see them. You've heard about some of them. When they show you those crazy ideas, take a look if any of them includes murder. Doesn't. Take a look at any of those crazy ideas include anything illegal. It doesn't. Take a look at if they're actually then go to lawyers to make sure that their ideas are legal. Murderers. You heard it. Unindicted co-conspirators going to lawyers to make sure that what they're offering is allowed. You're going to see that. But the ideas were crazy. You're going to read the emails, a lot of emotion. A mother-in-law, a grandmother with a lot of emotion. And you're going to see that Wendi Adelson, she rejected them. She rejected the ideas. They were never presented to Dan Markel. And then you're going to see that there was another idea. They have mentioned it in their opening, but they don't understand the importance of it. See, at one point in time, Donna Adelson and Harvey Adelson came with an idea to pay Professor Markel $1 million to allow their daughter to relocate. And they went to Charlie, who frankly by this point in time had more money than them. And they said, will you lend your sister $350,000? She'll pay you back or we'll pay you back. And he said, sure. And you're going to see that they presented this idea to Wendi Adelson. And the idea wasn't to take the boys out of Professor Markel's life. The idea was that with the $1 million, if Professor Markel agreed, he could live in South Florida and commute back and forth to Tallahassee. He could work out his schedule. He didn't teach every day of the week. He could work out his schedule so that he could still teach at the university and go back and forth. You're going to see that Wendi Adelson never made that offer. But it's very important. Like the joke, I want you to put it in your back of your mind for now. Let's fast forward to October 2013. October 2013, Charlie started dating Catherine Magbanua. We'll call her Katie. She was beautiful. She was smart. Like Charlie, she graduated from UCF. She was hardworking. He met her in one of the dental practices. At first, the relationship was casual. They wanted it that way. Charlie particularly liked it and liked Katie because she had 2 children. He worked a lot. His priority was his job. And Katie didn't bother him a lot. He only saw her like once, maybe twice a week. That's what he liked. And she was smart. She was fun. And he treated her very well. And that was very different, you'll learn, from how she was treated previously. Now, you'll hear that he spent a lot of time with Katie over the months that they dated. And remember how I told you Charlie talks a lot and repeats himself a lot? Well, when they were together, he did just that. He talked about his day. He talked about what was going on in the world. He talked about his family, which, by the way, was a constant topic every single day. Because when Charlie's driving in the car every morning for an hour to work and an hour home, sometimes longer, he talked to his mom on the phone. And when he talked to his mom on the phone, what would be a topic of heavy conversation quite frequently? Wendi's divorce. All the problems in the divorce. They told you that. They told you that in opening. And what would Charlie do? He would tell these things to his girlfriend. And what were some of the things he told her? Well, he told her about the $1 million offer. He told her that he could pay it in cash. She said, that's a lot of money. He said, no, I have it in cash, and I'm going to get it back. He told her several times the joke. Over time, you're going to see through text messages that Katie wanted a deeper relationship. And you'll see that Charlie didn't want that. You'll also learn, and the timeline is important. They meet in September. They start dating in October of 13. You're going to see that over time, it takes a couple months, Charlie starts to learn a little bit more about Katie's ex, Sigfredo Garcia. And what you're going to learn is that Charlie Adelson never meets Sigfredo Garcia officially, but by all accounts, he was not a good guy. Violent, long criminal history. Sigfredo Garcia and Katie had been high school boyfriend, girlfriend. And Katie was the love of Sigfredo's life. He lived for her. And you're going to see that Sigfredo Garcia hated Charlie Adelson. Puzzle pieces. So let me repeat it. You saw their chart. The shooter of Professor Markel, the man who murdered him, hated Charlie Adelson, according to them, his co-conspirator. And you're going to hear, not from our witnesses, from their own witnesses, that he wanted to kill Charlie Adelson. You're going to hear that in March of 2014, just 7 or 8 weeks before that first attempt of murder that they talk about, he tried to kill him. Puzzle pieces. You're also going to hear about a phone call on July 1, 2014. You're going to actually hear that July 1, 2014 call is how they found these guys. It's actually the craziest fact in this entire case, and there's a lot of crazy facts. You're going to hear that on July 1, 2014, Sigfredo Garcia made a call to the cell phone number of Harvey Adelson. It's the only call that helped investigators connect these folks to the Adelsons in the beginning. It actually broke the case. What they don't know, what you're going to see, it's in text messages. It's discussed on the wires. They don't know it because they don't understand it because they weren't there. Is that on July 1st, 2014, just 3 weeks or so after the first murder attempt. And by the way, just 17 days before the murder. Let me repeat that. The murder happens on July 18, 2014. On July 1st, 2014, Sigfredo Garcia tries to run Charlie off the road. He threatens him. And what you're going to hear is that on July 1, he's so upset that he calls the Adelson Institute. He doesn't realize that Charlie isn't the doctor at the Adelson Institute. He just comes in and out of the place. So he gets their voicemail machine. And you know how dentists are? They say in an emergency, call a cell phone number. They take your call at home on the cell phone number. Well, he hears in an emergency, call Dr. Adelson at such and such number. He thinks he's calling Charlie Adelson, but he calls Harvey Adelson. And he calls him and he threatens him. He tells him, if you keep dating Katie, we're going to go mano a mano. I'm going to kill you. 17 days before, according to them, he conspired with this man to kill Professor Markel. Puzzle pieces. What you're going to learn is that in the spring of 2014, it became apparent to Katie that her dreams of financial security with Charlie were not going to work out. You will learn that Katie heard the hitman joke. You will learn that she heard the $1 million offer and she got some ideas in her head. The state itself has called Catherine Magbanawa the mastermind. And that's exactly what she was. So now let's get to July 18th. I kept you waiting long enough. The June attempt didn't happen because Rivera didn't want to kill Dan Markel when his boys were around. See, what you're going to learn is during that June attempt, on June 4th, 5th, Professor Markel had custody of the boys. You're going to learn that Professor Markel and Wendi Adelson shared custody 50-50. But you're going to learn that the state thinks Wendi Adelson was involved with her brother in a murder for hire, and she chose for the killers to kill her ex-husband when he had custody of her kids. Puzzle pieces. So you're going to learn that Luis Rivera, who is a bad guy, he had some conscience somewhere and he didn't want to do it in front of the kids. So they came back. By the way, on July 18th, who had custody of the kids when the murder actually happened? Professor Markel. You're going to hear he dropped them off at school. But this family who did this so that their grandchildren could be with them were going to risk for 2 hired hitmen to go up when he had custody of the kids. Puzzle pieces. July 18th for Charlie starts as a normal day. He works. You're going to see he lives in Fort Lauderdale. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with South Florida, so I'm going to give you a little bit of geography lesson. He lives in Fort Lauderdale. That day, he's working in 2 offices because he'd often work in 2 offices a day. He'd work in the morning at one place and the afternoon at another. So he's working in 2 offices. The first office he's working in, both of them actually, are in Jupiter, Florida. Now, if you're familiar with South Florida, Fort Lauderdale and Jupiter are not close. With South Florida traffic, in the morning, he was in the car for at least 2 hours. Now, he came home late that night, you're going to hear, so traffic was a little bit better, but it's probably still an hour to an hour and a half. Jupiter is north of Palm Beach. When I drive up here and I hit Jupiter, I know I'm about a third of the way here. That's a good way to look at it. If you live in Fort Lauderdale, when you hit Jupiter, you're 1/3 done. He's in the car and he's talking on the phone. And you're going to see it. We're going to show you what the phone calls are about. He talks to his sister, talks to his mom, talks to his girlfriend. We'll talk to you about it. There are phone calls. You're going to see it. There are a lot of phone calls. And there are a lot of phone calls to his girlfriend. And there are a lot of phone calls to his mom. We're not going to deny that. And he works in these two offices. And at around 6 o'clock, you'll see a text message that he's about to start a very long surgery, a big procedure. By the way, the text messages throughout the day are normal. Just after 7 p.m., he gets a call from his mom. And he's told that Professor Markel has been shot. And he's shocked. He's upset. His first reaction is, Wendi and the boys okay? He's supposed to have dinner originally with a friend that night. But earlier in the day, that changes, and he's supposed to have dinner with Katie. And you're going to hear that Katie and him had gotten in a fight a couple days earlier about dinners. You'll hear it. And what you'll learn is after he finds out what happened, tells Katie he doesn't want to go to dinner. He leaves the office at around 8 o'clock in Jupiter. And you'll learn that Katie tells him she'll come to his house that night to comfort him. He's shook up. Now, let me be clear. You're going to hear he wasn't close with Professor Markel. They weren't friends. They had nothing in common. But he shook up because someone he knew, the father of his nephews, had been shot. When Katie arrived that night, and you're going to learn more details of how she gets there, what she has to do to get there. It's not planned. You're going to see that. The state's going to put on that evidence. You're going to learn that she's scrambling to get a babysitter. You're going to learn, by the way, that Charlie had seen her for lunch the day before. So if it's a murder for hire, why didn't she get the money then? Puzzle pieces. But you're going to learn that she gets there that night, sometime after 11. And when she gets there, she is frantic. She's upset. And he's scared because he's never seen her this way. And she sits him down and she tells him something terrible has happened. She says that a friend of hers had shot Professor Markel. She tells him over and over that she had nothing to do with it. But these people, she was talking too much. And her friend and these people learn about the problems that his family was having with Professor Markel. They learned about the $1 million offer. And they got it in their minds to do this. As you can imagine, his life has just forever been altered. He asked, who are these people? She won't tell him. It's not safe for you to know. Screaming at her. She won't tell him. Charlie had a guess. You will hear in detail what happened that night. You will learn that Charlie Adelson was told if he didn't pay within the next 48 hours, he or one of his family members would be next. You will learn that Katie repeatedly said that she had nothing to do with it and acted distraught. You will hear how she said that she would help him. You will learn about the initial payment. It wasn't $100,000. It was more than $100,000. He took out everything he had in his safe. You're going to learn about that. The state doesn't know it. It was more money. But you're going to learn he didn't have $350,000. So he had to pay every month. They don't know about that either. Payments every month. Does that sound like a murder for hire? Or does that sound like extortion? You're going to hear about these gifts. And you're going to learn that the gifts were just that. They were gifts. Because as time went on, he became more and more certain that Katie was not involved. He became more and more certain that she was helping him. And he wanted to keep her happy too because he needed her. He needed her help. And you will hear that the payments changed a couple months after the night of the extortion. 2 crimes. You'll hear that the payments changed and that Katie was put on the books of the Adelson Institute. Paper trail. They created a paper trail. Puzzles don't fit. Pieces of the puzzle don't fit. And you'll hear that in order to put her on the books, despite Katie telling him the night of July 18th, you can never talk about this with anyone. You can never talk on the phone about this. You can never talk about it in public. You can never talk about it anywhere, because if they find out, they will kill you and your family. If they think the police are coming to you to talk to you, they will kill you. Look at what they did to Professor Markel. But you will hear that he told someone. He had to. He told his mom. You'll learn that she was the bookkeeper for the Dental Institute. You'll learn why he had to tell her. You'll learn about those checks. They've never been able to understand. Why are they so sequential? Why are they back and forth? You'll learn why. They talk about the bump in 2016. What I like to call is the second extortion. What they don't realize is that their undercover operation was an extortion on an extortion. They don't know it. It's not their fault. And we're going to go through the wires with you. We're going to go through Dolce Vita with you. And we're going to show you how they actually prove his innocence. We're going to show you how they are talking carefully. They're talking to him. He's talking about an extortion. They're happy if this bump is the police, because if it's the police, none of them are going to get killed. if it's a bad guy, they're in danger. If you do a murder with someone, the last person in the world you want this bump to be is the police. Because it means they're on to you. Puzzle pieces. Not from the first layer, she says, but from the second layer. I got goosebumps when she said it. It's one of my favorite lines in the recording. Not from the first layer, the first extortion, but from the second layer. 20 months later is the bump. That's the second layer to Charlie Adelson at that point in time. You will also see, and what's going to be weird about this case, ladies and gentlemen, and you're going to start to see it today, much of their case, I agree about. They're going to put witnesses up there. I'm not going to ask them one question. Some of their evidence is exactly the truth. It just doesn't prove a murder. The stapled money, it's his money. You will also see that Sigfredo Garcia was arrested on May 25, 2016. You will see that Luis Rivera was arrested on June 2nd, 2016. You will see that Catherine Magbanua was arrested on October 1, 2016. Guess who wasn't arrested? Charlie Adelson. He wasn't arrested for 6 more years. And what you're going to see is that they have the exact same evidence in 2016 against Charlie Adelson that they do today. The same wires. They talk about an enhanced Dolce Vita recording. You're going to get both recordings. You determine if you can hear anything better. See, the state's case against Charlie Adelson is a case of assumptions. It's a case of guesses. It was not brought until weeks before Katie Magbanua's trial. You can ask yourself why. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your attention. I want to ask for your patience in this case. A man's life is in your hands. He's innocent. Send him home. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
The testimony you're about to give will be the truth. You may be seated.
Ma'am, please say and spell your name.
Wendi Adelson, Wendiadelson.
Where are you from, Ms. Adelson?
I'm originally from Coral Springs, Florida.
And where do you live now?
I currently live in Miami.
How are you employed?
Now kind of part-time. I do asylum work and I fundraise for nonprofit organizations.
Are you an attorney?
By training, yes.
Okay. How long have you been a member of the Florida Bar?
Since I graduated and took the bar in 2006.
And are you here today pursuant to a subpoena?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And that subpoena confers use and derivative use immunity to you, so nothing you say could be used against you in the future.
That is correct.
That doesn't mean you have full immunity from prosecution, but nothing you say here and nothing derived from it could be used in that prosecution. Is that your understanding?
That is my understanding.
Did you know Daniel Markel?
Yes.
How did you know him?
We were married.
When did you meet Mr. Markel?
We met in the fall of my second year of law school, so fall of 2004.
And where did you meet?
We met in Washington, D.C. He was working there, and I was looking into a summer job in Washington.
When did you get married?
In February of 2006.
And when did you live here in Tallahassee?
We lived in Tallahassee my third year of law school, so from August of 2005 until I think around maybe May or June of 2006. And then we moved to Miami for a year because Danny was interested in working at the University of Miami. He did not get the job at University of Miami, and so we moved back here in 2007 and lived here until 2014.
And where were the two of you employed during the time you lived here in Tallahassee?
I was employed at the FSU Center for Human Rights, and Danny was employed at FSU Law School.
Were you both professors at FSU College of Law?
Yes.
And were you living on Trescott Drive at that time?
When we were married, we lived, I think we rented a house before that, but at some point, maybe in 2008, we moved to Trescott Drive.
And is that the home that he was still living in at the time that he was killed?
That is correct.
Okay, and you were no longer living there, is that correct?
I was no longer living there.
All right, at the time he was killed, you two had children together, yes?
Yes.
And how many children did you have?
We have 2 children.
And what are their ages now?
They are 13 and 14.
What about at the time of their dad's death?
At the time of their dad's death, they were 4 and 3.
When did you separate from Professor Markel?
In the fall of 2012.
Whose decision was it to separate?
It was my decision.
And was part of the reason for the separation the two of you having differing views on how to raise your kids as far as within the Jewish faith?
I mean, it was a small part, but it was part of it.
Okay, that seemed to be something that came up a lot in your communication, so that's why I ask about it. What was the difference of opinion on that?
I mean, when we first met and started dating, Danny wasn't as observant or as religious as he became over time. And so the difference in our perspective on raising kids was about dietary choices and attendance at synagogue, things like that.
So in general, he wanted to raise the children more strictly in terms of the faith than you.
That is correct.
Did you move out of the marital home while Mr. Markel was away on a business trip?
I did, yes.
All right. And did he know that you were moving out when he left for the business trip?
No, he did not.
Where did you go when you left the marital home?
I rented a home in Tallahassee.
Where was that? Do you remember the address?
Aqua Ridge Way.
3303 sound right?
That's right.
Okay. And what was the custody arrangement once you moved out of the marital home?
I mean, in the beginning, until we had a formal custody arrangement, we were just finding ways to share custody. I remember that first weekend his parents came, so I made sure he had the children all weekend while his parents were visiting from Canada. But eventually we had a 50-50 shared custody arrangement.
All right. And do you remember exactly what that looked like? Was it week on, week off, or something more complicated?
It was something more complicated. In the summertime, it was week on, week off. During the weeks, it was I think what they called like a 2-2 split, with Wednesday night being an overnight and then the weekends being every other weekend.
All right. But roughly 50-50.
50-50, but that was the split.
Okay. And I want to show you what's been introduced into evidence, State's Exhibit 56. I know you've had a chance to take a look at this before, but if you'll just kind of thumb through it and tell me if you recognize it.
Sure.
Do you recognize the exhibit?
I do.
Is it a fair and accurate copy of your divorce file?
It looks like it, yes.
All right. And is it fair to say this was a contentious litigation process that you had with your ex?
It was.
And I want to ask you about a specific filing in there. It's on begins on page 43. And it's in reference to a filing on January 14th of 2013, where you were looking to relocate with the minor children. Do you recall that particular filing?
I recall the filing. You said 43. I'm not sure oh, okay.
Yes, ma'am. On the bottom, there should be page numbers for you.
Yes. Yes, I recognize it.
Okay, and that's the filing in reference to your motion for relocation?
Yes.
Okay, and did you file this motion with the intent to not be successful?
Sorry, I don't
It's
understand
been
the question.
suggested that you never thought that was going to be successful. Did you?
I
Or
think
not?
I thought there was a small chance that it would be successful, but not very likely, no.
Okay. And weren't you thinking, well, maybe Danny would be happy working somewhere else because he's mentioned applying elsewhere, so maybe he'll allow the relocation? Were you
Well,
thinking
he
that?
and I talked about the relocation. So when we talked about it, he thought, well, if I can live nearby in Miami, that might work. And then I could commute to FSU. I didn't mean for him to leave FSU, but he wanted to leave FSU at some point. So that
So
was just a matter of time.
So you thought it might be successful?
Sure. I mean, I thought it was possible, but not likely.
All right. And page 46 of that document, paragraph E references the job offer. The wife also desires to relocate to South Florida in order to provide a better quality of life for the children by increasing their access to close family and providing more stability and consistency. Who is the close family in South Florida?
The close family would have been my mom and my dad and my brother.
And which brother is that?
My brother that's here today.
Charlie Adelson?
That's correct.
Okay. What's your mom's name?
My mom's name is Donna.
Donna Adelson?
Yes, that's
What
her
a-
name.
What about your dad?
My dad's name is Harvey.
And where did Donna and Harvey live back in the time frame between 2012 and 2016?
They lived at the home I grew up in Coral Springs.
And how far do they live away from you currently as we sit here today?
Currently, depends on Miami traffic, but anywhere between 15 minutes and an hour.
Right. And what kind of a relationship do you have with your parents as we sit here today?
I have a good relationship with my parents.
And has that always been the case?
I would say so.
Can you describe the relationship that your mom has with your boys?
I think it's very loving. I think she's a very dedicated grandmother.
She spends a lot of time with them, doesn't she?
She does, yeah.
And when they were little and you first moved there after Danny's death, how much time was she spending with them?
When I moved there after Danny's death in 2014,
How much time was your mom spending with the boys?
I mean, we were all living together at that point. So, I mean, we were spending every day together.
How were your parents employed? Are they retired now?
They're retired now.
What are they retired from?
My dad was a dentist, and my mom used to coordinate, kind of be like an office administrator at his practice.
And did she write the checks at the practice? Paychecks?
Yes. She handled all the bookkeeping.
What was the name of the practice?
The name changed over the years, but probably the name when they retired was the Adelson Institute.
And were your parents wealthy at the time that your husband was murdered?
I mean, my parents worked their whole lives to support us, right?
Mhm.
So I think the business did well for a period of time.
About $2 million in profit each year between 2013 and 2016.
They
Sound right?
never talked to me about money, so I have no idea how much the business made at any given point.
Did you discuss your marital problems with your mom at all?
I did, yeah.
Okay. What about the resulting legal issues? Was your mom read in on those things?
I mean, I definitely updated her about the results of the relocation when that petition got denied, but not kind of the ins and outs of every part of our divorce.
What about your dad? Was he invested in your divorce status?
I think the same as my mom, just worried about me and worried about the boys.
Mhm. What about your brother? Did he take an interest in the ins and outs of your divorce?
No, not really.
Did he need to protect you from Dan Markel?
No, I mean, I don't think I need protection.
Were you physically in danger from Dan Markel?
No, I wasn't in danger.
Did the litigation revolving around the divorce and the subsequent issues that arose, did that impact your family back in South Florida?
I mean, only to the extent that I think they felt bad for what I was going through, but
I want to show you an exhibit that I've marked as State's Exhibit 59. Sorry, 57, Your Honor. You've seen this one before as well. Does that one look familiar?
I don't remember it, to be honest. It's from 10 years ago.
Take a moment to look through it.
Sure.
When you're done, I'll let opposing counsel take a look at it, but go ahead and let us know when you're done reviewing it. All right, are those emails between you and your mother?
I don't think I responded. I think they're just emails from my mom to me. No?
Okay, mostly all from your mom.
Yeah.
Okay, and the email address says, I think it's something like Wendi Harvey. Can you tell from the content that it's your mom typing rather than your dad?
Yeah, the email's Donna Harvey, my two parents' names. So they've been married over 50 years, so they have a joint email address. So it's from both of them.
Okay, so what I want to draw your attention to is page 2 of that exhibit, that first paragraph there above the word response. Did you have an opportunity to read that?
I read it real fast,
Kind
but
of scanned.
I can
And,
read it.
and what I want to draw your attention to is specifically the part that reads, your father has made numerous trips by plane for weekends and changing the patient schedules around so he can continue to spend significant time with the children. Did you?
Are you objecting, Mr. Rauschenfeld?
I just didn't hear it get admitted into evidence.
Judge, at this time, I'd ask to move this exhibit into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection.
It's 57.
57 is admitted. Go ahead.
Thank you. So that paragraph, isn't that paragraph going into detail about how the issues surrounding your divorce and litigation is financially impacting in a negative way your parents' business?
That's what my mom says here. Yes.
Okay, and it also says, additionally, this loss of income affects my family because my older brother, also a dentist, purchased the practice from my father in mid-July 2012. He has a monthly payment to make to my father based on the sale of the practice. It isn't fair to him to have decreasing monthly income statements from the practice due to my parents spending so much time here in Tallahassee. So this is an argument that your mom is proposing, right, to help you, give you an idea of what might persuade the courts to allow the relocation. Do you agree with that?
Yes, that's what she was doing. Yes.
Okay, and she's indicating that both your parents as well as your brother have suffered financially as a result of you not being able to relocate.
Yes.
Okay. And on page, do you have page numbers in the bottom right corner of your exhibit?
I have them in the top so I can see.
Okay, so 5 of, well, let me look. Give me a moment. So it'll be the second email in your packet, page 1 of 3.
Okay.
Do you see that?
I see that page.
Okay, and there's a rest of your life highlighted or underlined in the center and in bold. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, right before that, it reads, however, the rest of your life and consequently Dad's, mine, and yes, even Charlie's will be affected by how well you can perform/act before July 31st. You need to be a good actress you can be a good actress when you want to. I've seen you in action. You need to put on the performance of your life. Jibbers hasn't beaten the Adelson family yet. Who's Jibbers?
Jibbers, she's referring to Danny.
And was Jibbers a name he went by or just something you called him behind his back?
Jibbers was a silly nickname that I gave him during the divorce proceedings when he was being pretty scary and threatening, and it kind of made me feel less scared of him.
Okay, so not something you called him to his face,
No.
but that was a word that was only used to describe him.
Yes, it was a nickname.
Okay. So in this, again, your mom is referencing how everyone's life is being affected by this relocation, including your brother, Charlie. Do you agree with that?
That is what she said. Yes.
All right. Is your mom overprotective of you?
Yes.
All right. And is it fair to say she's, a little on the controlling side?
I don't think she's controlling, but she's definitely overprotective.
Did she ever try to micromanage your life?
Maybe. Yeah.
Did she have an interest in who you were dating and who you weren't dating and who you should be dating when you
I
were
mean,
single?
I think she was usually disappointed that I wasn't dating more.
Okay. For example, isn't it true that she would like not let you drive to and from Tallahassee to South Florida?
Well, I used to drive before I had the boys, but they were young and she preferred to come with me and give me some extra support.
So what would that look like if you were going to take a trip to South Florida? Would they come up here and get you, or?
No, sometimes I would go myself with the kids, but I was breastfeeding both of them. So it usually looked like me breastfeeding a child while I entertained the other in the Okahumpka rest stop. So
Okay.
it was a lot. It was helpful to have some backup.
All right. And so that time frame you'd be referencing is like the 2013 time frame, because not around the time of Danny's death you wouldn't have still been breastfeeding, would you?
If Lincoln was 3, no, I would have stopped maybe the year before.
Okay.
So
And
maybe
was it
2012, 2013.
okay? And wasn't it true that around the time of the death they were still doing this practice where they would prefer to drive you to and from South Florida?
I mean, not every time, but sometimes.
Okay. And would your mom sometimes enlist your brother Charlie to convince you to do certain things in your personal life?
Can't really think of an example of that.
Well, dating Dave was a big one on some of the materials I had.
Yeah, people like Dave.
All right. And your mom really liked Dave.
Yeah, everyone liked Dave, but we were just friends.
Okay. Did she try? So she would try to get Charlie to convince you to date a certain person.
I don't think she was getting Charlie to convince me to date Dave. I think everyone liked Dave.
All right. And would she try to get Charlie to convince you to do certain things as far as your professional life? What jobs to take?
No, I don't
She
think
didn't
so.
do that. Would she try to get Charlie to do certain things like advise you on investment decisions, whether or not you were going to buy a house, for example?
I don't think so. I don't remember that. Danny and I made that decision together.
Once you had left Dan and you were living separately, did you look into purchasing a home here in Tallahassee?
I did, yeah.
And did your brother Charlie convince you not to do that?
I don't remember him convincing me not to. The only reason why I didn't was because I was waiting on the money from Danny from the settlement and he didn't pay it, so I couldn't afford the house.
And your mom didn't want you to buy the house, did she?
That's not true. My parents were looking to buy a house in Tallahassee as well.
Okay. Did you have strike? Generally speaking, does your mom manipulate the personal lives of her children?
No.
Is your mom, like, if she's really upset about something or worked up about something, is that something that your brother Charlie's going to hear a lot about? Who's going to hear more of it, you or Charlie?
Well, if my mom's upset with me, probably Charlie. And if she's upset with Charlie, probably me.
Okay, so do you get a lot of that? Do you hear a lot about, let's go back. Let's go to before the murder. Did you get a lot of Donna just giving you an earful about what Charlie needs to be doing?
Probably at some point.
What was Charlie doing with his personal life? What did his personal life look like
At what point?
before the murder?
I mean, at what period of time before?
All of them. Wasn't it just a revolving door of girlfriends?
Right, but my mom didn't complain to me about that.
She didn't mind that with him.
I don't understand the question.
She didn't mind if he went from girl to girl to girl. That was acceptable.
She didn't really weigh in on it, no.
Who talked to her more, you or Charlie?
Charlie.
A lot more, right?
Yeah.
At the time of Dan Markel's murder, were your parents extremely angry with Dan?
At that point, no. They were in a much better place.
I want to direct your attention to an interview that was conducted on, I think this was your law enforcement interview. So July 18th, 2014. And I'm specifically for court and counsel looking at
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I hit a button and I fucked it all up. Okay, let's get back to this. Sorry about that, you guys. I'm still gonna stay on mute because I'm like trying to cough. I try not to cough. I mean, I want to definitely go live later tonight on my other channel. So I'm trying to just like get this cough under wraps. So I apologize about that. Sorry, I hit a button and it kicked us out. Yeah, there you go. Okay, smoke break. Exactly. Oh, sorry. I apologize. Okay, let's keep going with this.
Do you want me to flip through or just look at this one page?
If you'll just look at that one page for me, not that reminder. 27. Let me get to where you are. So page 27 there, lines 11 and 12, and I've got it highlighted for you.
Yes, ma'am.
Says, Ms. Adelson, you know, my parents are, you know, very angry toward him. Is that true?
Was that
Isn't that
true?
what you said? Your parents were very angry toward Dan.
Can I read the rest of the sentence?
Sure.
So I say, you know, my parents are very angry towards him, but even when they're around my kids, they would never say a bad word about my kid's father.
And then on page 288, line 24 through page 289, line 1. And that's going to be, didn't you say, you know, it's like my parents have more reason to dislike Danny than almost anyone else. Is that what you said?
That is what I said.
And that's because he hurt you, right?
And I was saying that in the context of talking to law enforcement for hours and hours and trying to help them figure out who might be responsible.
Right. And who did you tell them might be responsible?
Well, I told them many, many people, but are you asking about this particular moment right here?
You told them your family might be responsible.
Or
didn't
potentially
you?
someone to do with a former student or his current girlfriend. I mentioned lots of people that I thought could be responsible.
Okay. And of the lots of people that could have been responsible, your family was one.
Yep.
Because they might have done this thinking it would help you. And that's what happened, right?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
Your family had your ex-husband killed to try to help you, didn't they?
No, that's completely untrue.
And back to the divorce, the petition where Danny is responding to your petition for the motion to relocate. Are you familiar with that filing, or do you need to take a look at it?
I need to take a look at it.
All right, it's going to be page 79 through 101, and this is back to our exhibit 56. And again, that was the filing begins on page 79. I'm specifically interested in 82. And in this filing, doesn't Mr. Markel say, quote, the husband affirmatively alleges that the wife helped herself to non-marital assets, including money and stocks owned prior to marriage, as well as numerous personal non-marital belongings of the husband, such as luggage, bicycle, tennis racket, and family heirlooms. The The wife has refused to return these items or to allow the husband into her home to see what other personal belongings were taken without his permission or acquiescence. So my point is, he's accusing you of theft in this paragraph.
Those are the words that are here, yes.
Yeah, and he's very adamantly objecting to your relocation, right? On page 82, it says the sole stated reason the wife seeks to relocate is so that she can be closer to her parents. Was being near your parents the sole reason that you wanted to relocate?
No,
It wasn't the sole reason stated in your petition?
it wasn't the sole reason stated in my petition, and it wasn't the sole reason that he and I talked about before I filed the motion to relocate.
Why was he so adamant and so confident that this was the real reason you wanted to be down there?
I think there's a lot of things in these pleadings that are not true. So just because it says something doesn't make it true.
Sure, but did he know that your mom was just grinding on this issue of trying to get you down there?
He would have had no idea.
He wouldn't have been, that wouldn't have been known to him?
I don't think so.
But he was accusing you in these pleadings of all kind of stuff, right? I mean, I'm not saying it's true, but hiding financial assets, failing to disclose things, kidnapping his kids in the middle of, his business trip, all those sorts of things, right?
Yes, he said lots of things.
All right. And you said a lot of things too. There's filings going both ways that are pretty venomous. Would you agree with that?
I would not agree with that.
Yours were pleasant.
I'm not saying divorce filings are pleasant, but mine were not venomous.
Okay. Did your mother, Donna Adelson, review the filing in which Dan Markel is accusing you of this theft and all this stuff?
I don't remember if she did.
What about the one where Dan Markel is asking that your mother not be permitted to have unsupervised visitation with the kids?
My mom never saw that because after he filed that, he then asked my parents to babysit the kids. My mom baked him banana bread, gave him a hug goodbye. So there was nothing truthful about that pleading that he filed, and my mom never saw it.
Why do you think he filed that?
He was really angry at me for leaving him.
Okay, so he didn't really want to limit your mom's visitation with the kids.
No.
And
He
that's
asked for her to
evidenced-
babysit after he filed that.
Evidenced by the banana bread. And so she didn't even know about that filing.
She never knew about it.
Okay. And when she laid all those options out in that email to you about other options that you could take to secure the relocation, as far as bribing, remember that? Converting the Christian children to Christianity, remember that suggestion?
I sure do.
Okay. What did she put in there that she viewed as your most non-negotiable and most important part of your divorce?
I don't know. Do you have something I can see?
States Exhibit 57. And it is page 1. Page 1, paragraph 2.
So you want me to read what she said here?
I want you to answer the question. What was the most important part?
Of the divorce for my mom.
Yes.
It says here that for her it was relocation.
All right. And did you have 2 8-hour mediations in your divorce?
We had 2 very long mediations. I don't remember exactly how long they were, but they
Did
felt
they
like a very
result
long
in a
time.
resolution?
No.
Was Mr. Markel seeking to depose your mom as part of the divorce?
I don't remember that.
Do you know if it ever happened?
I don't think it happened. I don't remember it.
Was the prospect of that upsetting to your mom?
I don't think so. I don't remember it. So I don't remember talking with her about it or.
Did your mom call Dan any disparaging names around this time frame?
Well, I just read them in the emails, but I
Okay.
don't remember them independently.
Okay. Did she call him an asshole?
Yes.
A narcissist? A
Yes.
bully?
Yes.
Religious zealot.
Yes.
Bastard.
That I don't remember.
Page 5.
Okay. Is it page 5 from the first email?
Yes, if you'll just go through by the physical pages.
I see. Yes.
I'm sorry, what was your answer?
Yes.
Fucker?
Yes.
But in all the filings made on your behalf by the different lawyers that you had, and all of the emails that your mom sent, he was never described as abusive.
I mean, he was described as emotionally abusive. Yes.
Can you show me where he was described as emotionally abusive in any of those items?
Well, not by my mom, but in the pleadings.
Okay, show me that.
It's going to take me a while to find it.
Okay, well, it's
You want me
not
to-
in there, but you can get back to me
Well,
with it.
it is in there.
Objection, Your Honor. The comment. She's not testifying.
Hold on, please approve.
Alrighty. A sidebar. So yeah, it's a sidebar. What do you guys think so far? Isn't this crazy? Mom seems like way up everybody's ass, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, daughter seems like a spoiled little brat. And the defendant is like 100% mama's boy, right? He is so arrogant. I really just see it in his face. While they were saying like the words that his mom was calling, the names that his mom was calling, you know, he was smiling. This guy is a fucking, I don't know. I don't like him. Okay, here we go back.
So would you have to review the whole file?
Oops, sorry.
Give us a starting point of which filing it might be located in.
It might be under the petition to relocate. It might be under the initial divorce proceedings.
Okay.
It wouldn't be in emails from my mom, but it would take a while to find it. It might be in the depositions.
Okay, did you view yourself as being stuck here in Tallahassee once the relocation was denied?
I didn't. I mean, I had a really nice life here. I did not view myself as being stuck.
Would you please turn to page 176 in that exhibit in front of you? I think it's highlighted for you. Did you describe yourself in that filing as being stuck in Tallahassee?
I don't see it. You said it was highlighted, but there's nothing highlighted.
Okay. 176
Mhm.
on page. I didn't highlight it for you. Okay. Just a moment.
I see the word stuck. I found it.
Okay. So did you describe at least in one occasion being stuck in Tallahassee?
No, can I read the sentence?
Sure.
So it says, the husband has made it difficult for the wife with her colleagues at her current position due to his statements and actions. And the husband's intent is to relocate to a larger area at some point. So the wife is merely stuck in Tallahassee until the husband decides that the time is right for him to leave.
All right.
Meaning-
And had he accepted a job anywhere else by the time that he was murdered?
No, he hadn't yet been offered a job, but he was always looking.
Okay. So he was just going to move and just let you have the kids at that point?
He probably would have done what I did, which is have a conversation and see if it was a place that made sense for both of us to live.
And would you have moved to wherever he got a great job and started a new life there?
Potentially, yeah.
Okay. Did you like Tallahassee?
I did.
And you said, I think you did say this, but let me clarify. Was your mom aware of the order denying relocation?
My mom was aware of the order denying
And
relocation.
what about your brother, Charlie? Was he aware of that as well?
I'm
if you
sure
know?
my mom would have said something to him.
All right. So did your mom suggest any ways that you might coerce Dan Markel to let you move with the kids to South Florida?
Yes, I think we talked about that before.
We did. And for this, I'm referring back to those emails. And in particular, the bribe. So another bribe to get him to allow relocation. I'm on page 5 of the first email for the defense. Another bribe to get him to allow relocation should be the offer of plane tickets so that he can fly back and forth, right? So you're going to potentially offer this big monetary benefit that would allow him to fly back and forth to work. Is that the idea?
I never said that I was going to do any of that.
Okay, was that the idea that your mom had?
That was the idea.
All right, and the amount of the bribe is going to be, or was at least discussed as being $1 million. Is that right?
That is what they said.
Okay, and did you agree with that?
No.
Would that have worked?
I have no idea if it would have worked, but
You think he might have taken $1 million to let his kids go?
well, he wasn't letting his kids go. He would have moved to South Florida and he would have commuted back and forth to his job. So maybe
Well, then why wasn't it offered?
because I didn't want to do it.
All right, what about the idea that you could try to threaten Dan to convert the kids to Christianity so that they can fit into the Bible Belt here in Tallahassee? Is that something your mom suggested in these emails?
My mom did suggest that.
Okay, and specifically, this is on page 7 of the exhibit. Let Jibbers know that your children will be baptized in the Catholic Church. Have a picture made of them in front of the church, all that kind of thing. That's what your mom suggested at one time.
She did, yes.
Okay, and did you do any of those things?
No, I don't even think I responded to it.
Do you know whether the defendant, your brother Charlie, was supportive of the plan to convert them or pose as converting them to Christianity?
I have no idea. I don't think he was particularly involved in this round of my mom's
On
emails.
page 11 of the exhibit, there's an indication from your mom that Charlie at least has discussed this with her and maybe is somewhat supportive. Charlie brought up a good point when he said that Americans were dropped behind enemy lines during World War II wearing Nazi uniforms to get what they wanted. They had a job to get done and they did what they needed to do to accomplish it. You have a job to get done in a very short time frame to accomplish it. If you dressed your kids up in Hitler Youth uniforms and brought them down here, I could care less if it was an act of defiance that would show Jibbers that he's, all caps and bold, not in control. So it just seems like your mom was pretty extreme about this situation of getting you relocated. Can you
I think
agree
she
with
was-
that?
Yeah.
All right, and Charlie was at least consulted on it or had offered some information about it.
Well, that was my mom's rendition, so I don't know if that's what actually happened or that was her perception.
Sure. Were you involved in the effort to consult a lawyer about the bribe and whether that was going to be legal?
I wasn't the lawyer consulted in that.
No. Were you involved in consulting a lawyer with your
No.
mom? Okay. Do you know for sure if any financial offer was or was not made to Dan Markel?
I couldn't say for sure if they made it to Danny without me knowing, but I don't think so.
Is that something they would do, is try to negotiate with him behind your back or deal with this situation behind your back?
I don't think so. I think I would have known. Danny probably would have told me.
But you definitely didn't extend any of these offers or threats.
No.
When was the divorce final?
The summer of 2013.
All right, I'm going to switch gears for a minute and talk about phone stuff. Was your cell phone collected by the police in this case after Dan was shot?
I gave the police my cell phone and asked them to search it if it could be useful.
All right. And around the time of the murder, was your number 954-803-0079?
It was.
And can you agree that the numbers, let me show you an exhibit. You will. Okay. I want to explain what it is. Okay. Yeah, so I talked a lot about converting to Christianity, but I didn't mention what religion you are. We talked about Dan being more religious than you are, but we didn't talk about what religion you are. So could you explain that to the jury, please?
Sure. I'm Jewish.
And Dan was as well, right?
And Danny was Jewish as well.
Okay. So I had this exhibit 59. This is not. Yes, that's what we did. One moment. All right, you may not be able to do this, but states 59, I've got phone numbers attributed to your family members. Obviously, you don't know the other people. Are those phone numbers accurate, if you know, for the time
Yes.
frame around the murder?
Yes.
Okay. All right, and then you are also familiar with the wiretap that was conducted in this case?
Yes.
And did I provide you a disc labeled disc 107, ask you to review some calls and see if you could authenticate the voices on those calls?
Yes.
All right, and for that, I made you a little spreadsheet, which I've marked as 61. And were you able to initial by each call indicating that the highlighted names are the voices of the people they purport to be?
Yes.
Judge, at this time, I ask written evidence, state 61.
Any objection?
No objection.
State 61 is admitted.
All right, and if we can shift back to, we talked about your divorce being final. Once the divorce was final, weren't there still a lot of filings that went back and forth between both you and Dan Markel?
Yes and no. The divorce was final. We had a final settlement agreement. The agreement was I take my name off the title to the house. He pays me half the value to the house. So for within the first week, I went and took my name off the title to the house, and I waited until October when he was supposed to get back to me. He never paid me the money. And so I called and I asked what happened. That was the deal. And he said, I have compelling reasons. I'm not going to pay you. And so I made one filing, a motion to enforce the settlement agreement because he didn't do it.
Right, so you believed that he owed you money pursuant to the settlement agreement. And he was
Yes.
in violation of the settlement agreement.
Yes.
And he was of the belief that you had withheld some financial things from your affidavit, and maybe he didn't owe you the money that you had previously agreed on because you had not been honest in the initial disclosures, right?
He accused my attorney of having unclean hands and committing a crime.
Yeah, and assisting you in withholding this money from the
Correct.
disclosures. Okay. All right, so I want to ask you about the motion to enforce marital settlement agreement and hold Dan Markel in contempt of court. That was filed, you may need to refresh your memory, October 31st, 2013. You, the exhibit 56, and have you take a look at, this is going to be on 338. All right, could you just read the title, the caption of that filing?
Motion to enforce marital settlement agreement and to show cause why the former husband should not be held in contempt of court.
What does it mean to be held in contempt of court?
It means not to be doing what the court has asked you to do.
What can happen to you if you're held in contempt of court?
I don't know, really.
Could you be jailed?
I don't know.
All right. And when was this file? This was you filing it, right? I mean, you're the client.
Right.
You're asking that he be held in contempt. And
I
you don't know
filed
what
this-
that means?
I mean, at the time I filed, which was 10 years ago.
Oh, okay. Well, refresh your recollection with the
Okay.
document. It goes through 340.
Okay, I have it.
Okay. So what was it you were asking for in this motion?
It was what I just mentioned. So basically, I took my name off the title to the house. He never paid. This was asking him to pay.
Cough up the money or be held in contempt?
Yep.
Okay. And what day was this filed?
This was filed on October 31st, 2013.
All right, so Halloween of 13, and that's the same day that you backed out of the contract to purchase the house in Tallahassee, right?
I don't
Remember
remember
that?
what day that was.
Okay. Do you remember that it was your brother, Charlie, that specifically convinced you to back out of that particular house deal?
I don't actually. I don't remember that.
Okay, there is about 10 minutes left in this segment, and then I will quit for the night, and I will come back tomorrow with the next segment. I'll try to start a little bit earlier because this is already, today was day 3. I was mistaken about that because Court TV posted a day 1 today, and it said like 3 hours ago or whatever. And so I was like, oh, it's just started today. So, but I didn't pay attention. So we got a little bit to catch up on. But yeah, let's watch the rest of this, and then I'll have a chat with the few of you that are here. But thank you so much for hanging out. That's awesome. Numbers don't matter to me. I love sitting here watching the stuff. So why not go on live while I'm watching it and hang out with some people? So anyways, okay, let's keep going.
These text messages refresh your recollection. Okay. And you may have to look around for context, but I'm specifically looking at this one.
Okay. Okay.
Does that refresh your recollection?
Honestly, I mean, I can read what's here, but I still don't remember.
Don't
it
really
independently.
remember. And after pulling the plug on the house, there were some emails where you were saying you can't answer the phone, you're crying too hard about the house. Like you seem genuinely upset about pulling the plug on the house, but now you don't remember it?
Well, it's been 10 years.
Sure.
So a lot of terrible things have happened since then. It's hard to remember.
Don't recall.
I really liked the house and was excited about it, but it was more than I can afford at the time. That's what I remember, is talking with the real estate agent and having her say we'd find another house, and it wasn't the right one.
Would you have any reason to dispute that occurred on Halloween of 2013?
No, it probably did. I just don't remember.
Okay, and then a few months later, on February 14th of 2014, there was another filing. I want to draw your attention to page 379. And ask you what that document is.
Do you want me to read the title of the document?
Yes, please.
Former husband's counter motion to enforce marital settlement agreements, financial provisions, and incorporated motion for sanctions.
Do you remember this filing?
I don't remember this filing, but in anticipation of my testimony today, I refreshed and reread it.
Okay, and he accuses you in this filing of breaching the marital settlement agreement in various ways, right?
That's correct.
Okay, and committing a fraud upon the court by omitting the $200,000 in assets from your financial affidavit.
That is
in
what he
there?
was alleging.
And ask the court to sanction you.
Yes, that's what he
And-
said.
Okay, so again, you're both seeking the court to sanction each other. I mean, them's fighting words and lawyer terms, right?
Well, I was filing a motion to enforce a settlement agreement, so I don't think that's really fighting words. That's just asking the court to complete what it already said it wanted to do.
Okay. And on page 379, Dan suggests that the court send a strong message about your malfeasance by awarding him the entirety of the undisclosed assets of over $200,000, right?
That is what he asked for.
Okay, and then on March 10th of 2014, on page 437, do you respond with your motion to dismiss the former husband's counter motion to enforce the marital settlement agreement that we just talked about?
I'm sorry, what is the page number?
437.
I'm not familiar with this, but do you want me to read through it?
Could you read the caption aloud, please?
Sure. Motion to dismiss the former husband's counter motion to enforce marital settlement agreements, financial provisions, and incorporated motion for sanctions for failure to state a cause of action, and motion to strike as a sham pleading, and motion to strike as redundant, immaterial, impertinent, and scandalous pleading.
And then if you'll go to page 439, do you see a paragraph that begins, the vast majority of the former husband's motion?
Actually, don't see that. On page 439?
Yes, ma'am. I think I have it pulled out. in one of
On
these.
number 8.
Yeah, the vast majority of the former husband's motion contains allegations that are redundant, immaterial, impertinent, and scandalous. Yada, yada. He's making false and immaterial statements against you. His pleadings only prove that he is a disgruntled former husband who cannot move past this disillusion. So it's getting personal. Would you agree with that?
My attorney here is responding to his pleading, which was over the top.
And this is over the top, right?
I don't think so, no.
Then 6 days later, Dan files another motion seeking action against your mother, and that's the one we've already touched on. That's page 441. Is that right?
Page 441.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, that's what we talked about.
Okay. Former husband's counter motion for enforcement of marital settlement agreement on parenting issues and motion for contempt and sanctions. Here he's alleging, again, more violations of the marital settlement agreement, including communication between he and the boys. He wasn't happy with how much communication was happening, failing to keep him informed of where his kids are, failure to communicate about parenting decisions like the kid's schooling, diet, and extracurricular activities, and refusal to provide him access to the kids on their birthdays. So he's complaining about a lot of things associated with this, not just money stuff, it's parenting stuff too, right?
That's right.
And isn't it in this motion that, yes, sir.
I said that's right.
Isn't it in this motion that Dan Markel seeks to enjoin you from allowing your mother from spending time with the kids without supervision?
Can you please show me which page that's on?
450. Do you see a paragraph beginning on 3 specific occasions?
Yes, I do.
Could you read that, please?
8A, on 3 specific occasions in November 2013, the children informed Mr. Markel, Abba, Dad, Grandma says you're stupid. When queried as to why Grandma, the maternal grandmother, would say such things, the children replied jointly that it is because she says you are trying to take her sunshines away from her.
And continue, please.
In December 2013,
You don't have to say the name.
Yeah.
Your child.
my child, the younger son, further stated to Mr. Markel in front of the former wife, Abba, Grandma says she hates you. The children were visiting with their grandparents at that time.
Mr. Markel is concerned that continued exposure to such negativity forms a foundation for parental alienation. Is that what he was alleging about your mom?
That is what he is alleging in this document, yes.
And this was filed in court.
He filed this in court.
On what date?
It will be at the front of the document, right?
Yes, ma'am. Page 441.
This was filed on March 26th, 2014.
And this was the filing that never got ruled on, right?
I don't believe there was any ruling on
And
this.
that's because Dan Markel was killed before the hearing, right?
I don't know when it was scheduled for.
It wasn't even scheduled yet.
Okay.
It was waiting to be scheduled when he was killed. Is it fair to say your mom was worried about this motion?
No, my mom never knew about this motion. And as I mentioned before, Danny asked my mom to babysit after filing this motion. So I don't really believe anything that's written here.
Well, you forwarded this motion to your mother
I don't believe I
via
did.
email. In fact, you forwarded this motion to 12 different people. Your mom, Jeffrey Lacoste, Renee Griggs, Tova Walsh, Morgan Honeycutt, Gary Cohen, Miguel Edmondson, Trey Hubler, Robert Adelson, Rachel Frank, Jared Reich, and some MEHULNYC@yahoo.com. So if you weren't worried about this, why'd you send it to all these people?
I couldn't really say. It's been a long time.
And then a couple days later, we know what happened.
So this was in March. So a couple days, I filed it. I sent it to people in July when Danny
You
was killed.
sent it, I'm sorry, you sent it a couple days later.
I sent
That email to 12 different people.
in March.
Yes.
Wow, that is insane, you guys. That's insane. This is like, goody two-shoes family with lots of money and think that they can like control everybody and push them around and make them do what they want to do, especially mommy. That woman, ooh, she's a wicked lady. So yeah, tomorrow we will continue. Miss Wendi continues on the stand tomorrow. So we will definitely watch that. And I also have, she is on the stand for a little while longer. And then we have the neighbor testifies. And Also, Wendi, the one that's on right now, her ex-boyfriend also comes up. And like, how many boyfriends and girlfriends do these people have? Like, my God, comes up and he testifies as well. So I have all of that stuff ready to go. And tomorrow we will definitely look over it and, excuse me, watch a little bit more because it's kind of crazy. So if you don't want to know what's going on, like right now with it, then I would say stay away from Court TV because they are the ones that have this and they're broadcasting it. So we are, we have a couple of days to catch up. So, but I am going to try and bring up all of these videos maybe on YouTube, and then we can fast watch them. So yeah, so I know this wasn't a very busy live, but I hope those that did come in and hang out, K-Braids, thank you so much for being here. You hung out with me the whole time. So I hope I'll see you tomorrow for sure. And we'll continue with this. So I probably will be live on my other channel a little bit later. I'm not quite sure what time yet. I have to pick up my daughter at 9:30 from work. So we'll kind of see. It'll probably be a late live, but hopefully I'll see anybody that's here over there. So thank you for hanging out with me, and I hope you guys enjoyed that. I know it was a little bit quiet, but like I said, I've just been coughing and stuff like that. So hopefully tomorrow, maybe we'll be able to stop every once in a while and chit chat a little bit more about it. So anyways, yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate that. And we will see you around the streets somewhere. So I will let you know Queen Bee is going to be going live around 8:30, I think she said. So make sure you guys hop over there if you want to. So yeah. All right. Thanks, you guys. Love you. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.